Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, President Trump back at the White House after his trip to China.
We made great deals. We did great trade deals. We have great relationships. And a lot of things have happened that you'll be hearing about them.
What he's saying about Taiwan, chip manufacturing, and AI.
Polls open this morning for primary voters in Louisiana. A Trump-backed Maha Republican is challenging the chair of the Senate's powerful health committee. Could the pharma and healthcare industries lose an ally?
And breaking overnight, workers for the Long Island Railroad on strike.
We cannot responsibly make a deal that implodes the MTA's budget.
What workers are demanding and how the MTA is responding as trains stop running on the nation's busiest commuter railroad.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Guerrero with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, May the 16th. A hearty welcome to all our listeners and viewers across all our Bloomberg platforms on radio, TV, streaming on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Business app. And some news this morning breaking about not the Trump-Xi summit,
That's right.
but the next Xi summit.
There's another Xi summit. President Putin saying he's heading to Beijing to meet with the leader on the heels of that big U.S.-Sino summit that just wrapped up. Very interesting news.
Scheduled to take place on May 19th and 20th. And the way that the Kremlin is characterizing this meeting as it's going to coincide with the 25th anniversary of the Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation, which serves, quote, as the basis for interstate relations.
When you say a phrase like that, I just picture that old USSR CCP like artwork with the Chinese worker
Yes.
and the Russian worker and the.
It has a
it's very good
scent of Sovietism there.
Nostalgic ring to it.
All right, May 19th and 20th. More on that as the morning develops here. But first, let's get a check of the headlines with Lisa Mateo. Lisa.
You got it. In service on the nation's largest commuter railway, well, it's come to a halt. Workers on New York's Long Island Railroad, they went on strike. Kevin Sexton is vice president of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen.
Regrettably, as of 12:01 a.m. this morning, we are striking the Long Island Railroad. After 2 days of round-the-clock negotiations, the parties were unable to reach a deal. This was a management-provoked strike, as far as we are concerned.
MTA Chairman and CEO Jano Lieber says it's not the result that they were looking for.
Like Governor Hochul said, everybody loses in a strike. The MTA, the striking workers who lose their wages, and most of all, the riders who rely on this railroad every day. But I and my MTA board have been clear that we cannot responsibly make a deal that implodes the MTA's budget.
The strike comes as the two sides could not come to an agreement on raises and issues like health care contributions. More than 270,000 daily riders rely on the service to travel between New York City and Long Island. The MTA said it will provide free shuttle buses. This is the first strike on the railroad since 1994, and that's when a 2-day suspension shut down the service. President Donald Trump back at the White House after returning from a 3-day trip to China to meet with President Xi Jinping aboard Air Force One. He told reporters he and Xi talked a lot about Taiwan.
I mean, he's, against very much what they're doing. We talked about Taiwan, we talked about Iran a lot, and I think we have a very good understanding with both. On Taiwan, he does not want to see a fight for independence because that would be a very strong confrontation.
President Trump said he has not yet made a decision on whether a major sale of U.S. arms to Taiwan can move forward. Trump's Republican administration has authorized the sale, but it has yet to proceed. Now, China opposes the deal. The president said he also raised a potential 3-way nuclear deal involving the U.S., Russia, and China. Now, the Kremlin says Vladimir Putin will visit China next week. In other news, President Trump announcing late last night on social media that U.S. and Nigerian military forces had killed the Islamic State's second in command globally in a, quote, meticulously planned and very complex mission. The president called him, quote, the most active terrorist in the world. And a big day in golf as the PGA Championship continues at Aerodynamic Golf Club in Pennsylvania. Oh, I killed that one. Maverick McNeely and Alex Smalley tied at the top of the leaderboard at 4 under par. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the live play-by-play coverage today and tomorrow starting at 2 p.m. Eastern. David and Christina.
To be clear, you're not doing the play-by-play.
I am not. Maybe we say the guy in the shorts is winning or the guy in the
try and say the name of that golf club.
Yeah, all right, very good. Lisa, thank you very much.
We appreciate the effort. All right, so President Trump, as we mentioned, is waking up in Washington this morning following that summit with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. He talked to Fox News about the trip, calling Taiwan, quote, the most important issue. But here's more of what he said.
Should the people of Taiwan feel more or less secure after your meetings with President Xi?
Neutral. Neutral.
Has the policy changed at all?
No, nothing's changed.
U.S. policy?
No, nothing's changed. I will say this. I'm not looking to have somebody go independent and, we're supposed to travel 9,500 miles to fight a war. I'm not looking for that. I want them to cool down. I want China to cool down.
But you're waiting on approving billions of dollars of weapons for Taiwan.
That's right.
Is that
I'm
moving forward?
It. Well, I haven't approved it yet. We're going to see what happens.
What are you looking for?
I may do it. I may not do it.
Yeah, what's your hinge point?
Well, I'm not going to say that, but I may do it. I may not do it. But we're not looking to have wars. And if you kept it the way it is, I think China's going to be okay with that. But we're not looking to have somebody say, let's go independent because the United States is backing us.
No substantive agreements from that summit have been announced yet, but President Trump did invite President Xi to Washington in September. Joining us now is Stephen Engle, Bloomberg's chief North Asia correspondent. He is in Beijing, and Bloomberg White House correspondent Courtney Subramanian is with us as well. Stephen, let me start with you and have you react to what we heard there from the president in that conversation with Bret Baier of Fox News. This was a signal moment from that summit, the remarks that President Xi made about Taiwan. Indeed, it resonated over the course of these 2.5 days in Beijing. Talk about how both sides here are shaping that message as President Trump makes his way back to Washington, and we begin to sort of process what indeed took place over the course of the summit.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable that the two presidents did talk at length, at least according to Donald Trump. They talked at length about Taiwan. And keep in mind, coming into this summit, as we did a lot of previews, we talked to a lot of people here in Beijing about what do we think the Chinese side will really want? What's their deliverable? We debated ad nauseum about what potentially could be the U.S. deliverables, especially with that huge 17 to 18 executive entourage that came with Donald Trump, including Jensen Huang and Elon Musk and Tim Cook and others. But on the geopolitical front, what did China want? And it was really boiled down to the 3 T's: trade, including tariffs, tech, including those accelerators from NVIDIA, and then Taiwan. Well, the U.S. courts kind of took care of a lot of the hot button issues on the tariff side. Tech, it wasn't really discussed, according to Jamieson Greer, the U.S. trade representative, in an exclusive interview we had in this room. In fact, just yesterday, he said it wasn't even discussed during their 2.5-hour talk in the Great Hall of the People. So that really left Taiwan. And clearly, Xi Jinping issuing his most blunt warning, if you will, to a U.S. president about Taiwan, that if it is not handled well, it could lead to a very dangerous situation. And clearly, that is something that the Chinese side wanted to get across from the get-go, because even before that 2.5-hour bilateral first meeting between those two gentlemen in the Great Hall of the People, the Chinese state media put out Xi Jinping's statements, not even giving the U.S. side the opportunity to do any kind of reaction to that. And also, when Donald Trump was finally asked about it, he stayed very uncharacteristically quiet on the subject. So there was a lot discussed, though.
Courtney, I thought that was so interesting that the Chinese put out that statement stating that they had issued their stance on Taiwan before that meeting had even responded, before the meeting had even ended. And to Stephen's point, the U.S. didn't really push back. We didn't see a competing statement come out right away from the White House. We also, in these interviews, President Trump seems to have received the Chinese message. Is it clear that China received something similar from the U.S.? And what was America's message on this issue? Because it seems to me the response to that normally would be to issue approval for that arms package Taiwan has been waiting for the president's signature on. That still hasn't happened. The president said in this interview that he's going to hold it as kind of a bargaining chip for all these other things he's trying to get out of China. Why not just sign that deal and keep the status quo if that's what the president says he wants?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the U.S. has been insistent that, the status quo remains in place. Nothing's changed in policy. But the president's comments were, remarkable yesterday to Fox News. He, as you mentioned, called it a chip to be leveraged. And I think that signaled he may hold off on approving that deal until Xi's visit in September, which in itself would just be a win for Beijing, right? This is something that allows them to buy more time and keep the U.S. at bay. And so again, I think that is a win for China walking away from the summit.
Stephen, I want to go back to sort of what we're waiting for here again. It's shaping the message, shaping the understanding of what unfolded at the summit, but also waiting for any indications of what deals might have come out of this. Just get us up to speed on what we might see, what we're expecting. I think going into this summit, as you've pointed out, there were these expectations that there might be announcements on tariffs and trade. We saw the plane full of tech executives. Maybe that would lead to some big announcements on some tech deals. There has been whisperings of sort of how big this Boeing purchase plan is likely to be. What are you waiting for? What are the statements you're waiting to see land in your inbox here in the next 24 or 48 hours?
Well, the whole AI infrastructure and build-out story is a global story. So when Jensen Huang goes up to Anchorage, Alaska, and jumps on board Air Force One to come to Beijing at the last minute after essentially saying that he wasn't going on this trip, but that gave us a lot of indication that perhaps there was something brewing on the H200 or the H20, even the watered-down accelerator that has already been approved for sale to China. But it's China, especially on the H200, that's come out and said, we don't want our companies buying it right now. Of course, China is really focusing on indigenous innovation, building out their own chips and also their own technologies for their large language models. But again, clearly the LLMs here in China would love to have the H200 or those types of chips from China, from NVIDIA. But again, nothing was announced. So maybe that's something that's going to come down the pike later on. We thought maybe because Elon Musk also made the trip, he's been pushing hard for FSD, full self-driving in China technology. It has not gotten over the regulatory hurdle there, even though they've gotten signals that it's going to come eventually. He wants robotaxis in China. Again, that is not something that came. So where we got some deliverables, if you will, were on the agricultural front, probably as a result of Congressman Steve Daines, who really representing the beef and soybean lobbies. He's been here several times over the last year making that case. So, there's soybean commitments. There's beef that's going to be back on Chinese tables after about a 14-month pause because of that tariff barrage coming from Washington, and maybe corn as well. So we're waiting for a few more things. That Boeing jet order, according to Boeing and Donald Trump, was about 200 planes. The market was expecting 500, so it sort of fell short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw the market very unimpressed with that order yesterday. We're going to talk about that more a little bit later. Courtney, I want to talk to you about Iran because our White House team has a story on the term this morning saying Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi came out with a statement that's a little bit stronger than we've seen from the Iranians so far, saying the strait should be open to shipping as soon as possible. Now, that's something I think a lot of the people in the world are comfortable saying. It's not really taking a stance. It's just saying it should be open. What did President Trump want from China in the way of Iran? We've got a bit of sound I'm going to play from you, and then I want you to talk about it.
Every time they make a deal, the next day it's like, we didn't have that conversation. And that's taken place about 5 times. There's something wrong with them. Actually, they're crazy. And you know what? Because of that, they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Because
the president of China agrees with you on that. And
he agrees with me on that. He agrees with me that he wants to see it end. He'd like to see it end. He would like to help. If he wants help, that's great. But we don't need help. And you know the problem with help? When somebody helps you, they always want something on the other side.
So this is very interesting because the president has been really hard on European allies for not helping in the strait. Now he's saying to China, well, we don't really need their help. Look, China probably doesn't want a nuclear Iran. I think that's safe to say. But they seem reticent to get involved. What did the White House want here? What can it get out of China? And why is China staying on the sidelines?
Yeah, I mean, the president, first of all, he needs international support to help reopen the strait. That's something that experts have been very clear about. He said that she agreed with him that the strait should be reopened, but the two made very little progress on any actual plans to try and reopen that. He stopped short of leaning on Xi to actually ask Iran, but he seemed to think that she would follow through on trying to lean on Iran. He even went as far as to suggest that the U.S. may lift sanctions against Chinese companies buying Iranian oil as a means to try and move the ball a little bit on this. But again, I mean, they walked away from this with little progress on any movement on moving this peace talks forward. And this Iran largely hung over the summit. He said they talked a lot about Iran. This was, of course, supposed to be a summit that dealt with stabilizing economic relations and helping him ease some of those inflationary and affordability concerns at home. But it just went to show that Iran has largely remained a distraction, both for the president in his relationship with China and on the world stage. And, I think that he didn't really walk away with any commitments from Xi on Iran.
Stephen, let me have you pick up here. We're going to have a conversation in a moment just about this nuclear issue and the Russia-Iran relationship, the China-Iran relationship. And as a prelude to this summit, we saw the foreign minister of China sitting down with Iran's foreign minister in Beijing. Help us understand what China's perspective is on this conflict. As Christina pointed out, they'd like it to end. But in real terms, what's the commitment they're prepared to make here to accelerate that or to catalyze an end of the conflict?
Well, China, has long espoused their policy of non-interference in other people's affairs. And I clearly saw that they didn't want to have anything to do with this dialogue during this summit. This summit was about getting the relationship and the U.S.-China ties back on track after what has been a brutal year of tit-for-tat retaliation, tariffs upwards of 145% against China, China retaliating, the levers of leverage, if you will, with the rare earths and export controls. There was lots of bad blood. So Xi Jinping did want to have areas where they could find common ground. But he kind of jumped the gun as far as getting the narrative out there. That's why I think them putting out those headlines while on Taiwan really crafted the narrative. And really, it was very muted in their readout, anything about Iran. They basically mentioned the Middle East. And even here, the front page of the China Daily here is basically muted commentary, did not give any indication that China would help, even though Donald Trump says Xi Jinping indicated his willingness to help where they can because of their ear in Tehran.
Stephen Engle, thank you very much. Our colleague Stephen Engle there in Beijing, Courtney Subramanian joining us from Washington. She's one of our White House correspondents. And I'll point out here, Christina, President Xi and President Trump scheduled to meet Washington in September. We've got APEC in November, and then the G20 in the U.S. on the heels of that.
That's right. And of course, that breaking news we've been talking about, Vladimir Putin will head to China next week to meet with Xi Jinping. Our next guest focuses her research on the increasingly close relationship between American adversaries. That's straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. And the Supreme Court has rejected a bid by Virginia Democrats to revive a voter-approved map designed to flip Republican-held U.S. House seats. A Virginia Supreme Court had decided that the map was adopted in violation of the state constitution. The ruling is a big setback to Democratic hopes of countering Republican redistricting in other states. This is ahead of this year's midterms. Now, meanwhile, thousands expected to gather in Montgomery, Alabama today in support for voting rights. Colorado Democratic Governor Jared Polis has reduced the state prison sentence of Tina Peters. That's allowing her to be eligible for parole June 1st. Peters is a former county clerk convicted of tampering with election equipment and had been serving a 9-year state prison sentence. The decision follows a months-long pressure campaign from President Trump. And multiple outlets reporting that the U.S. could announce a possible criminal indictment of former Cuban President Raul Castro in the coming days. The investigation centers around the 1996 shoot-down of planes that were operated by the humanitarian group Brothers to the Rescue. It comes as President Trump ramps up pressure on the island, with CIA Director John Ratcliffe visiting Cuba for talks with top leaders. Cuba says the country has completely run out of diesel and fuel oil as it needs to power its power plants running. Now, it's pushing much of the island into darkness. It's also sparking some protests as well. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Pretty extraordinary meeting there on Thursday of the CIA director landing in
Absolutely.
Havana. Shots of the plane with him getting off.
And I was reading parts of of Havana and Cuba are now only getting about 2 hours of power a day, which is really incredible. I was there maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and power was inconsistent, but
totally different
better than
now.
this.
Yeah.
It's really, really difficult.
All right. In an increasingly interconnected world, no conflict, especially the war in Iran, happens in a vacuum.
The war has brought new dynamics and complications to Tehran's diplomatic relationships, from its Gulf neighbors who unexpectedly found themselves the targets of retaliatory attacks to a long-standing ally a bit farther away, Russia. Joining us now is Nicole Graevsky, assistant professor at Sciences Po Center for International Studies. Her book is called What Else? Russia and Iran, and digs into that geopolitical relationship through the lens of recent events. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with this news we've gotten today, and that's Putin has announced he's heading to China to meet with Xi on the heels of this Trump visit. Talk about the timing of this, and are these three leaders increasingly seeing themselves as on equal footing on this stage?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I mean, Putin's announcement of his trip to China isn't necessarily surprising. You've seen the Russians try to coordinate with the Chinese when either country actually deals with the United States. And especially given the situation in Iran, where both Russia and China have somewhat close ties to the leadership and have somewhat different goals there, but still have coordinated there. It seems like it's actually apt with this current situation for Putin to go and consult with the Chinese.
Nicole, we just had this conversation about the way that China sees what's happening in the Middle East, the degree to which they want to get involved or not, as the case is. What is Russia's vantage on all of this? What role is Russia playing in fueling the crisis that we're seeing in Iran?
Certainly during this war, Russia's involvement was much more substantial than other, escalations between Iran and Israel or Iran and the United States. Russia provided Iran with really crucial targeting information that essentially allowed Iran to target U.S. troops and bases on Gulf territory. Additionally, Russia's played this really interesting diplomatic game, and it's actually playing out right now in the UN Security Council, where there is an ongoing resolution on the Strait of Hormuz, but Russia has actually blocked that, partly because of its critical nature towards Iran. So Russia's played a really crucial role for the Iranians, especially as a bulwark against what they see as pressure against Iran.
I want to talk in a minute about some of the historical connections, especially in Syria and how Ukraine impacted that. But I am curious, is it clear, given the state or non-state of Iranian leadership, who exactly in Moscow is talking to who exactly in Tehran, and what the level of coordination is at this point, given the uncertainty in the command and control apparatus in Iran right now?
The Russians and Iranians have pretty deep institutional ties that go beyond the leadership. Partly because of their involvement in past military conflicts, but within the IRGC, there is some continuity. And so you see the Russians actually dealing with Iran, partly through the embassy with Russian military intelligence, and also Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that has tended to favor ties with Russia. I'd also note that Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of Parliament, has historically been a really large proponent of relations with Russia, making several visits to Moscow on actually a frequent basis. So the connections between them hasn't really been severed because of the kind of complications in Iranian leadership.
During our last conversation, Christina brought up the Chinese attitude toward Iran having a nuclear weapon, and I'm curious, sort of, with both of these powers, with China and with Russia, how do they view that? Are they agnostic about it? Are they encouraging of it? Sort of, what is their attitude toward the development of Iran's development of a nuclear weapon?
It's certainly correct that China doesn't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. And I think to some extent, Russia also fits into that place. But in recent years, actually since the war in Ukraine, Russia has cooperated with Iran on areas that are far more sensitive in relation to weaponization research. The Financial Times actually came out with a story last summer about Russian researchers providing really crucial information for warhead design and also work on parts of Iran's nuclear program that could be used to make a nuclear weapon. So that's shifted since the war in Ukraine, partly because I think the Russians view this as a challenge to the United States. But overwhelmingly, I think that neither Russia nor China would find a nuclear Iran to be that desirable. And that's partly because that means that Iran's far less controllable, and Iran probably will be less predictable too.
So then what is the strategy for providing them aid and support for their nuclear program? I mean, obviously, Russia and Iran have a history. Russia helped build or finish their nuclear reactor at Pricier and provide nuclear, I think it's fuel, correct me if I'm wrong, for that facility. But when it comes to the weapons program, why would they want to support that in any way? How do they benefit from Iran being a nuclear power other than just because it antagonizes the United States? Is that enough? Is that all it takes?
I mean, the Russians have done this cooperation at a level of plausible deniability, so it hasn't been sanctioned officially by the Kremlin. It's usually parts of the Russian scientific and technical base, and this is essentially a hedging strategy. I mean, Iran, if they make that political decision to obtain a nuclear weapon, are going to do so with or without Russian support. However, this at least provides the Iranians with some kind of comfort that the Russians are continuing to be their partner. And obviously, Russia needs Iran for the war in Ukraine and for their broader strategy of kind of multipolarity and this orientation that they've been going on since 2022.
You bring up multipolarity, and it makes me wonder about Russia's bandwidth, because we talk so much about its impatience, the difficulty of waging this war against Ukraine that's dragged on for so many years now. How does it, in light of that, view this conflict in the Middle East and its capacity or willingness to continue to engage with it? I guess, put more simply, how strained is Russia? How willing is it to invest time and energy and resources in the conflict in the Middle East?
Russia was never going to provide troops to Iran. I mean, this is something that actually is stipulated in some of their strategic partnership agreements that they've had in the past, where Russia would not provide a kind of provision of direct troops on the ground. And so, to some extent, Russia is strained, and their war economy is under pressure because of the war in Ukraine. But this was never really going to be on the cards in the first place. However, what we have seen in this war is that despite Russia's preoccupation with the war in Ukraine, they've been able to at least transfer discrete components or technology or actually intelligence to the Iranians that has greatly enabled the Iranians. So Russia can serve as an enabler, but they're not going to be this decisive actor to intervene on behalf of the Iranians. And that becomes important, especially if this conflict widens again, or there's a resumption of military conflict.
And we saw that a little bit in Syria, which I know you've written about in your book, and I was definitely stalking your X account today and reading through some of your tweets. And you were writing that, with the Assad regime, the numbers are not exact, but you said Iran probably spent about $30 to $50 billion propping up the Assad regime, and that wasn't popular with the Ayatollah. He was against it, but others in the IRGC supported it, and those people are now not alive, you wrote, for him to say, "I told you so," or for any of them to say, "I told you so." Why did they want to do that? What was the debate within the regime on whether or not, within within the regime, whether or not to support Syria, and why did it ultimately fail? And what is the fall of Assad? How has that impacted the relationship between Iran and Russia?
Well, Bashar al-Assad was really crucial to Iran's axis of resistance. Syria supported Iran during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, and they've really been a crucial component of these broader mosaic strategy that Iran had in the region, and partly as a resupply line to Hezbollah. So this was a crucial node in that network. Parts of the IRGC and actually former head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, went to Tehran and essentially argued in favor of an intervention, saying that if Assad fell, the entirety of Iran's regional strategy would unwind. Eventually, because Assad faced quite a bit of offensives from not only the Islamic State, but also the Syrian rebels, the Iranians eventually brought the Russians in for air support. But what the ironic part about this is that when Assad did fall, you did see also this coincide with the kind of collapse of Iran's regional strategy. So I think in Iran right now, there is a bit of a debate on whether or not it was important to be involved in Syria or whether that was just a failed strategy to begin with.
Let's come full circle here, come back to that meeting that's going to take place between President Putin and President Xi. So we've just been through the Trump-Xi summit with all the pageantry, the kids waving plain-side, the walk
Love
in
the
the garden,
walk.
admiring the evergreens and the ficuses.
Rubio really liked the ceiling.
There
There's
you
so
go.
much happening.
And so much stress here on stability, not on competition between these two powers. What does this next summit look like? Is there going to be the same emphasis? Sort of how does that relationship between these two powers, Russia and China, differ? And how will that manifest itself in the overtures that we're going to see from the Chinese president toward the Russian president?
I mean, the Russia-China relationship isn't just about, obviously, this war with Iran. They face actually common issues when it comes to even like nuclear arms control and potentially the U.S. buildup there. And also defense relations. Both Russia and China have a pretty robust defense relationship. China's working on improving parts of their military, and the Russians have been helpful there. But then again, Russia also needs China for certain components in Ukraine. So I think what's likely is that the summit will revolve around some of those issues, whether it be closer defense cooperation or coordination in the Persian Gulf. I think that's likely going to be on the agenda of this kind of upcoming summit. And of course, their press readouts will likely emphasize the typical dictums of sovereignty, non-interference, multipolarity that you typically see with the Russian and Chinese press statements.
We've only got about 30 seconds left, but given Russia's bandwidth, as David was talking about, and given the war in Ukraine and what we saw with Russia kind of pulling out of Syria as Assad started to fall, if you were in Tehran, would you consider Russia at this point a reliable ally?
I mean, that's a difficult question. I think certainly within the parts of the IRGC that have this new generation that fought in Syria, they tend to actually view Russia quite fondly, despite the abandonment of Assad. And partly because Iran actually resulted in abandoning Assad as well. But Russia has always fallen short on what Iran has wanted, which is far more extensive cooperation, especially in the military realm. So I think that right now the Iranians are viewing their strategic situation as kind of one in isolation, but still beneficial to have good relations with both the Russians and the Chinese.
All right, we will stand by. Nicole Gruevski, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Really great perspective there, and I think it's going to be fascinating to watch that summit unfold. I was talking about the pageantry and all of that, but again, at this moment, when you have, as you're saying, this kind of three poles of power here, that'll be fascinating to see them on.
And it's a good point. Does he get the same level of pomp and circumstance, or is this like, oh, this is my regular casual friend that I don't clean my house for? We know what we're about. We're just gonna make the deal.
We shall see. Again, that meeting is scheduled to take place early next week in Beijing. In the meantime, it is primary day in Louisiana with health care a big focus. What will it mean for the state's senior senator, one Bill Cassidy, who's facing a primary challenge? More to come on that in a few minutes on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Google's YouTube and Snap, they've reached agreements to settle a lawsuit from a Kentucky school district. Now, the district claims that the addiction to social media platforms has disrupted learning and pushed public schools to spend a massive amount of money fighting a mental health crisis. The case was set to go on trial on June 12th in federal court in Oakland, California. Elon Musk says he's not selling any SpaceX shares. It was in response to a user post that suggested he do so after a lockup period. It comes as sources tell Bloomberg the company is looking to file publicly for that long-awaited IPO as soon as Wednesday. Reuters reporting SpaceX has picked NASDAQ for its IPO and will list under the ticker SPCX. In NBA action, the San Antonio Spurs advance to the Western Conference Finals after beating the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the Knicks, they have to wait for their next opponent. It's going to drag on because the Detroit Pistons force a Game 7, beating the Cleveland Cavaliers. In baseball, the Yankees defeated the Mets 5-2 in the opening game of the Subway Series at Citi Field. They play again tonight, which could be a little bit difficult for those coming from out east with the LIRR on strike. And the PGA Championship, it continues in Pennsylvania. Maverick McNeely and Alex Smalley, they are tied at the top of the leaderboard at 4 under par. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, catch the live play-by-play coverage today and tomorrow starting at 2 p.m. Eastern. And tonight, the Preakness Stakes gets underway at a new location, Laurel Park in Laurel, Maryland. Not running in the race, though, Kentucky Derby winner Golden Tempo due to that short rest time between the Derby and the second leg of the Triple Crown. Christina.
In just about an hour, polls are going to open in a Louisiana primary, and one particular race is going to test President Trump's endorsement power, as well as the power of the MAHA, that's right, you heard me say that, MAHA movement. Incumbent Senator Bill Cassidy, who is a doctor, faces strong challenge from Congresswoman Julia Letlow, who has already been endorsed by MAHA Action. State Treasurer John Fleming is also in the race. Now, President Trump handpicked Letlow to try to push Cassidy out. Worth noting, Cassidy was one of the 7 Republican senators who voted to convict Trump after the January 6th impeachment. Joining us now is Bloomberg Government Congressional Health Policy reporter Victoria Knight. Okay, Victoria, set the scene for this race. I'm being told it's called a jungle primary. That is an actual term that we use. I looked it up. I did not know this. I've covered politics a long time. Explain what a jungle primary is, because you've got 3 main contenders on the ballot. So then what happens next?
Yeah, great question. And hi, thanks so much for having me. So this basically they just changed the system. This is the first time they're doing this. And so it used to be an open primary system, basically. So anyone could vote in primary elections. Now it's more of a closed system. And so we have 3 Republican candidates that are running, and they, whoever gets the top, so if no one reaches 50% of the vote, then it moves to a runoff in June. If someone reaches more than 50%, then they win the primary and they are moving on to the general election. But that is different than what it was before. Before, it was just you, whoever wanted to run would run into the general election, basically. So this is totally different. And people are saying that it could be a disadvantage to Cassidy because, you know, he might appeal to some more moderate voters, more moderate Republican voters, or even Democratic voters who live in a red state. And so now he is running against 2 other Republicans in this closed primary system, that it might be difficult for him to move forward into the runoff or win outright the primary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've seen this a lot, especially in districts that have been redrawn to be mostly Republican or mostly Democrat. This is why we're having such a hard time getting these 2 parties to talk to each other, because in the primaries, they have to run to the sides of their parties, and then it's hard for them to come back to the middle, even if they want to, in a general. So we're talking about MAHA. That's not MAGA. This is this Make America Healthy Again movement, right? Which I feel like when it started actually had some appeal across the political spectrum. I knew a lot of people I consider liberal Democratic friends who were really into the ideas of this, but it's morphed into something a little bit different. And talk to us about why this race in particular is going to be a test of this microcosm of the MAGA movement and whether or not it's effective.
Certainly. And I would say the Make America Healthy Again movement still has some bipartisan appeal, and that's because it's such a broad movement. It encompasses people who don't like processed foods, who have some concerns about vaccines, who are anti-pesticide. And so people have a lot of different concerns that fall within, you would call the MAHA agenda. And so there are some sector of Democrats that do agree with some of that in regards to pesticides, particularly in food. So I won't say it's completely partisan, but MAHA Action, the PAC that's aligned with Julia Letlow, as you mentioned at the top, is trying to elect just Republicans to Congress, and Republicans that include MAHA items, MAHA agenda items in their campaigns. And so Letlow is really the first candidate they are putting a lot of money and power towards and talking about a lot. And so we'll see if that MAHA endorsement and that money will help her move her through, whether it really has, just any power in the race itself is a question still to be answered, because there's a lot of talk about it, but are voters listening to that? Or do they care about that MAHA element as much as they might care about other elements? Certainly affordability is a huge deal in this election so far. So it might be a concern, but will it be one of the top concerns that motivates voters to get out and vote in this election? I think we'll see after we see some of the results.
And talk to us about Congresswoman Julia Letlow. Who is she? Where did she come from? And what does it mean for Trump's endorsement power if she wins or doesn't win?
Yeah, great question. So she, interestingly enough, she is serving in her husband's seat, or her former husband's seat. Her husband died of COVID in 2021.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so it's kind of interesting. There's that health element there. And she has said that she does support the COVID vaccine, but she believes it is something that should be discussed. Vaccines are something that should be discussed between the patient and their doctor. And so that's kind of a common Republican message coming out of COVID. They don't like the idea of vaccine mandates or everyone has to get a vaccine. And so that is an interesting note about her. When I've talked to her in the hallways of Congress, she says, she really aligns with MAHA a lot on the nutrition priorities. And so she has some young children. She really cares about getting whole food, non-processed food into their bodies. And so that's really what appealed to her and would make her align with it. I think she also, it's interesting because, Bill Cassidy has been a senator for 10 years. He's an incumbent senator. He has name recognition across the state.
He also gets a lot of support from pharma and healthcare folks who are going to lose a big ally on Capitol Hill, pushing back against some of the more vehement anti-vaccine strains in the party, right?
Yeah, certainly. I've crunched some of those campaign finance numbers, and he gets a lot of money from the pharmaceutical industry, from the healthcare industry. I mean, he has the top chairmanship on one of the health committees on the Hill, and so it makes sense that he would get a lot of money from those industry groups. That's kind of just how Congress works. But yeah, he certainly has been pharma friendly. He, can be skeptical about some kind of anti-pharma policies sometimes. It kind of depends. So yeah, if he loses, they would lose that ally potentially. Though I think anyone that gets into a Senate seat will then have corporate groups that want to come and give them money. And so we'll see if that changes. If Letlow is in the seat or Fleming's in the seat, they'll probably still get money from corporate interests.
Of course, we've got about 30 seconds before I let you go. But I just want to say, Cassidy, like you said, he's pro-vaccine, but he did get a lot of flack for voting to confirm RFK. That wasn't enough for the president. He still endorsed someone else in this primary.
Yeah, I mean, that is really the crux of all of this. And I think that's why everyone is watching this, because we have just seen Cassidy tangle with his conscience. And last year, it was a really public struggle. He literally said in the confirmation hearing for Secretary Kennedy, I'm struggling with my vote for you. And that is because of your stances on vaccines. And then we saw Cassidy go and vote to confirm Kennedy anyways. And that was not enough for Trump. And so Trump wants him out.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but we'll have to talk to you again after this all shakes out and see how it went. Victoria Knight, she's Bloomberg Government Congressional Health Policy Reporter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, coming up, BTW, Bloomberg this weekend. Also, by the way, some of our most read stories coming up with Lisa Mateo. That's coming up on Bloomberg this weekend on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. Stay with us.
All right, welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, or BT Dubs, as I call it, and we habitually argue about here on set. Here are some of the stories you might have missed this week. Lisa, what you got for us?
I got to say, I probably missed all of these because I was on assignment this week, so I don't know anything that's happening.
I know, we missed you.
I shouldn't say that to the
bit.
Viewers and listeners, but
just wait for the quiz. It's going to be glorious.
He's catching up. Yeah. Let me get you up to date, okay? These are the ones that you might have missed. Okay, family benefits, right? In the past, companies, it was all about who could provide them, but now it's starting to change. So this is the headline from the New York Times. It says, why two big companies just cut paid family leave.
They're cutting leave.
Yes. So this is Deloitte. This is Zoom. They said they were cutting the level of family leave that they offered. Parental leave. It's important because it's a big recruitment tool to get women also to join companies. Deloitte's also reducing family vacation time, limiting financial support for adoption, surrogacy, IVF, things like that. Other nice to have perks also remote work. We've been hearing about that. Like a lot of more people are being asked to come in. And the reason why they're saying is because now, the worker is not the one in control. Now the employer is in control, so they have more say in what can be done. So that's what they're saying. The workers don't have that upper hand anymore.
It's a tight jobs market. You gotta take the job you get.
It's tough.
You mentioned two companies, though. I wonder, sort of in the competitive marketplace here, a lot of companies still offering much better benefits, potentially would put them at a huge disadvantage, I imagine.
Well, it's interesting to me because Deloitte is such a big name in D.C., and I wonder if the fact that you have so many unemployed federal workers that they feel like they can scoop up folks and be like, this is a job, take it or leave it, because all those folks, at least a lot of my friends, are looking for work. So
another indication of what this kind of crazy labor market is like right now.
And there are some companies that are increasing. Starbucks, actually, they just increased their parental leave for their retail employees. Okay. So that's a nice side thing to it. All right. Okay, this next story, these are the extremes that boys and young men are going to look perfect, okay? So this one is in the Wall Street Journal. This is interesting. Teen boys and young men, they are injecting peptides in search of perfection. So you're asking, what are peptides? Okay, so they're like
you
these
anticipated
building
my
blocks.
question.
I did. I knew you. I saw it in your face, David. They're the building blocks of proteins, right? So they promise things like great transformations, muscle recovery. Think of it like GLP-1s are peptides. There's collagen peptides, right, to make your skin look a little bit better. There's a tanning peptide. Did you know that?
Oh, I don't like that.
And of course, the growth hormone peptides, which a lot of people, this is what they're concerned about. So they're injectable. They're not approved by the FDA. And they're sold primarily on the online gray market because these kids, as I've known from talking to my daughter, they do not tell their parents, and they go in the gray market and they buy these things.
They're buying it online.
They're buying it online, and they're injecting themselves. And so it has a lot of people worried because these are kids like 13, 14, 15, 16, who are still growing, and they're injecting it. So it's a little bit scary. Parents, have the conversation with your kids. You will be surprised at some of the things you find out. But it is ongoing, and doctors are kind of warning about it. So it's a good kind of thing to keep aware of
I'd heard that because so many people are using these GLP-1s, that the notion that you would inject yourself with something is becoming
easier to take.
Yeah, I've read the same thing. Because the threshold,
yeah,
it's really hard. Because, back in the day, really the only things you had to inject yourself is if you were diabetic or if you're going through IVF. And I know that was like such a big thing, like, oh, I have to do needles. But now, to your point, like so many people are used to doing it. It's like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. I know the system. And I think the threshold for things people are willing to inject is really dropped.
For me, it's this notion you just don't know what you're getting. Like on the unregulated gray market. I say it's one thing, but who knows? And it's not, as you say, approved by any regulatory body.
Exactly. Still experimental.
All right, you two go search your medicine cabinets for peptides.
Please. Okay, how much would you pay for a cocktail? What's the most you've ever paid?
I've paid 20.
20?
And
Okay,
I find that kind of galling, but if I've had one, paying 20 for another isn't as bad because I've had the first cocktail.
And you leave tip on top of that.
Yeah.
So here's a new thing. This is from Bloomberg, okay? A $12 cocktail, that has become the smartest play in the bar business because people's, their budgets are tapped, You're trying to save, cut back. They've been pre-gaming at home. They're having one drink instead of two. Like, they're cutting back. So restaurants, they're changing the game plan, okay? So they're cutting back. They figure between $10 and $12 is that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the place because what that does is people say, oh, it's only $10. Let me get another one. Let me get another one.
Yeah.
It starts to add up. And then they get people who are happy, they enjoy themselves, they come back, they get repeat customers.
You know what I love? The bonus carafe. Like when you get the martini, and then you've got like a small bit of extra martini on the side.
Like from the,
makes me feel better about an expensive cocktail.
All right, I need to know what bars you go to. I've never gotten the bonus carafe.
Well, you come with me and Tom Keen.
Oh, I'm sure.
We'll go out. He knows all the right places.
I did get a drink with my brother and my friend last night, and he gave us bonus splashes from the wine at the end. He just finished off the bottle,
same
which I
school of thought
appreciated.
there. You feel like you're getting a little extra, even if you're paying.
Even though the wine was $29 per glass, and it was the cheapest one on the menu.
I've never gotten that.
Well,
gotta smile.
We're going to correct that.
Gotta be nice to the bartenders. I don't know what to tell you.
One more. Get one in here.
Okay, let me go. This is from the weekend, okay?
All right.
The great wealth transfer includes $570 billion in classic cars. So imagine like Grandpa Joe's classic Caddy, right? It's been in the family. Everybody loves it. It's passed down. But there's new data to Bloomberg that 12 million enthusiast vehicles are going to transfer to this new generation in the U.S. over the next 15 years. That's where you get that $570 billion. But it's been causing some issues between families. It can cause some disputes, and then they're stuck with it. Do we keep it? Do we sell it? Like, what do we do with it? If we keep it, all this money that they're spending to kind of keep this, family heirloom running, it's a lot of money for them.
I would be getting like Mama Gura's Honda Accord.
I was just going to say, do I want a 1995 like Toyota Camry?
Yeah.
That's
it's still running.
It'll never die.
Never die.
It is a great piece. Hannah Elliott wrote that one for Bloomberg Weekend, and do check that out. I hadn't thought about that. I'm not in a position to be inheriting any classic cars, for better or worse, but you?
No, but my brother did inherit my non-classic car when I moved to New York. So, and inherit because he still has not paid me for it.
Find the camera. Say it to the camera. Try once again.
Has not paid me for it. Coming for you, Joey. All right.
Lisa Mateo, thank you for
Thanks,
BTW,
Lisa.
as I call it. By the way, here on Bloomberg This Weekend, a great roundup of stories that you may have missed over the course of the week on the Bloomberg Terminal and at Bloomberg.com. Coming up, how the war in Iran could impact the cost of an oil change.
That's right. The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend with all that news and much more starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 a.m. here in New York. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg's World Headquarters. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm David Gura with Lisa Mateo, bringing you the latest breaking news, reports, and analysis live this morning and every weekend from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock Wall Street time. continuing to piece together what we learned over the course of the week when President Trump went to China and sat down with President Xi, had those walks in the garden, as we were talking about, but a series of one-on-one meetings, and I think that's significant. We'll talk about that with Stephen Engle here in just a moment, the degree to which these two leaders got FaceTime one-on-one, and then we're looking ahead, of course, into this other summit that's going to take place that we heard about this morning between President Xi and President Putin.
It's a very popular destination for world leaders.
Beijing in the springtime, the late spring.
I'm sure it's lovely. All right, but first we're going to Lisa with the headlines. Lisa, what you got?
You got it, and you touched upon it. President Donald Trump back at the White House after returning from his 3-day trip to China to meet with President Xi Jinping.
We made great deals. We did great trade deals. We had great relationships, and a lot of things have happened that you'll be hearing about. But that was a tremendous success. I think it really was a historic moment. Thank you very much.
President Trump said he has not yet made a decision on whether a major sale of U.S. arms to Taiwan can move forward. China opposes the deal. The president said he also raised a potential 3-way nuclear deal involving the U.S., Russia, and China. And now, yes, the Kremlin says Vladimir Putin will visit China next week. To the conflict in the Middle East, where Iran's foreign minister says that a lack of trust remains the biggest obstacle in negotiations to end the war with the U.S. He says there have been contradictory messages from the U.S. that have made negotiations difficult. Meanwhile, Israel carried out strikes on Gaza City, killing Hamas's most senior military leader. That's according to the Israel Defense Forces and Israeli Security Agency. Emergency services in Gaza say that the strikes killed at least 7 people, with more than 50 others injured. The Pentagon drawing down thousands of troops in Europe by stopping units from deploying to Poland and Germany. Several U.S. officials tell the Associated Press that 4,000 troops from an army brigade are no longer en route to Poland this week. Now, the Trump administration had previously said it was cutting U.S. forces only in Germany. Service on the nation's largest commuter railway has come to a halt as workers on New York's Long Island Railroad go on strike. The MTA and unions failed to come to an agreement on raises and issues like health care contributions. Union member Dwayne O'Connor says it's not the best situation.
I have family that comes out on the train almost every weekend to visit, and this will be difficult because they will have to drive, which is also challenging.
And that was actually a commuter who says she has family coming in and talked about some of those difficulties that she's going to be having and her family members having. Now, 270 daily riders ride the service to travel between New York City and Long Island. And moving on right now, the MTA, they also said they're going to provide free shuttle buses. Now, this is that first strike on the railroad since 1994, guys, and that's when a 2-day suspension shut down the service. So back then, it only lasted 2 days. We'll see how long this one will last.
And it's going to cost $500,000 a day to provide those shuttle buses, and I just think what a nightmare this is going to be for commuters overall, but I still think that's going to be a stopgap that's going to be difficult for a lot of commuters as well, just trying to figure out where to go from
it's really crazy.
Jamaica Station to wherever in the city, and I don't know. It seems like a mess, and I'm also curious, talk about this more later, like if this were to be resolved tomorrow, would Monday be fine? I have no idea, like how quickly they can go from a standstill to back in motion.
I know it's not the same line, but it's all going through Penn Station, and I just think people are already stressed out about all these trains going out for the World Cup stadiums, and I think this is just going to increase people being nervous and people being stressed out, and whether or not people believe that the New York infrastructure can handle that.
One of our colleagues who covers the MTA and the LIRR are going to join us next hour to talk a bit more about this. In the meantime, President Trump back on American soil after his historic trip to China, the first visit by an American president to China in nearly 9 years, and President Trump's first return since his high-profile trip in 2017 during his first term.
That's right. This time, though, the backdrop is very different. We've got a war in Iran, an emboldened Xi Jinping, and a U.S.-Chinese relationship that has been strained by trade, Taiwan, technology, and global security. So back with us to unpack all of that from Beijing is our North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engle. Stephen, I want to start really broadly this time around with you and say, I want to talk about the different approach from these two world leaders, because I feel like Xi Jinping is very strategic, very deliberate, and mostly sticks to the script, whereas President Trump kind of goes on to these things based off of vibes. Sometimes, in his defense, that does work for him. Sometimes it's less effective. What are your takeaways from those two different approaches after this summit?
Yeah, that was really the focus of the preview stories that I was doing before we arrived here as well for this very truncated 36-hour bilateral talks between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Is about the level of preparation that the Chinese were concerned that the U.S. had not put in the required amount of time and mutual consultations to have mutually acceptable deliverables. The Chinese like everything orchestrated and well planned out and well illustrated on what those deliverables deliverables would be months and months in advance. We didn't have that. They didn't have that luxury this time because of what you just alluded to. They were quite concerned about the spontaneity aspect of the Trump administration and the president himself. So that's why, the tone was sort of the Chinese are on their home turf. They kind of grabbed the narrative by the reins fairly quickly. Before the first 2.5-hour bilateral was even over, they had already put out lines from Xi Jinping that wanted to get their narrative out before, I assume, the bilateral and the news media that was congregated from around the world started picking up on some of the issues of Iran. That's something that the Chinese did not want to go into that quagmire. They wanted to get their point on Taiwan across very quickly. I've been covering China and living out here for 36 years. And when Donald Trump says he'd like to see China cool down a little bit on the Taiwan issue, they're not going to cool down on this issue. Trust me.
Stephen, let me ask you lastly just about what I mentioned at the top of the show. That is the amount of one-on-one time these two leaders had. We were talking with Nick Burns, the former U.S. ambassador to Beijing, before this summit took place. Yeah. And he said that's the thing to watch for. You have these giant meetings in the Great Hall where there's a long table with the Chinese delegation on one side, the U.S. delegation on the other, and no room for spontaneity between those two tables. What did you make of the garden walks, the number of one-on-one meetings, the kind of interface that these two leaders had?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway really is a continued buildup of their interpersonal relationship because, again, the last year has been quite brutal in geopolitical relations and commercial relations because of the tariffs and just disputes over national security and tariffs upwards of 145%, and also the leverage that each side was finding. China clearly found their leverage with rare earths. The U.S. tried to wield their leverage with obviously the export controls on chips and other areas. So I guess the big takeaway here is they've had a number of walks in the park together now. They were in Busan just 6 months ago, which we were there. The walk in Zhongnanhai, which is the leadership compound, that complex dates back to the 1100s and 1400s when they really started building up the lakes there. So Xi Jinping really was talking about the historical significance of China's past. And, he even mentioned the Greek history of rising or established powers oftentimes get displaced by rising powers. So he was definitely steeped in history.
The Graham Ellison Thucydides trap came up.
Stop.
He said it, Christine. It wasn't me.
Listen, smarty boys. Stephen Engle, our Chief North Asia correspondent, thank you so much for dropping all that knowledge. And David and I expect a walk through at least some of those parks.
Yes,
we'll
make that visit happen.
At some point.
All right, a group of America's tech titans also traveled to China with President Trump. In some cases, they hitched a ride on Air Force One.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, Apple's Tim Cook, Elon Musk, among more than a dozen execs who met with top Chinese officials this week. We spoke with Caroline Hyde, co-host of B-Tech, about what these big tech companies were hoping to get out of their visit.
These are companies that President Trump made clear he wants to have a wide door opened to them to be able to sell to the Chinese consumer. Look, Apple, we have seen Tim Cook's legacy being the ability to navigate China, whether that's the consumer of China, which more recently in their earnings saw a real amplification of the amount of sales that they're getting out of the Chinese consumer right now. So we're really starting to see iPhone demand coming back to that country. But most importantly, it's a supply chain focus. It's the fact that a load of iPhones are still made in China, a key relationship for Tim Cook, and therefore no wonder he was there. Qualcomm serving their chips over there, so Cristiano Amon heads over. You see, of course, Elon Musk. Tesla is making an awful lot of Teslas from the Shanghai Gigafactory. We're also seeing more broadly the fact that they're dependent on China for resources, for electric vehicle batteries. The dominance of China in rare earths just keeps on being this real focus in terms of the more geopolitical angst that we have with US and China relations. But again, Tesla has actually also seen an uptick in sales of Teslas in China, particularly in the recent months, up 36% or so. So that is a key market for them to expand and get FDA clearance maybe. So actually you get full driving, self-driving is what he hopes, and regulation could be more welcoming to the autonomous future that he's really betting on. So there's a lot of hopes. And of course, the whirlwind appearance of NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, in many ways, there was then an an extraordinary move in Chinese shares, AI-related stocks, hoping that they would get access to the crucial H200 chips coming from NVIDIA. For now, the clarity is that came up, but China doesn't want them. They've got clearance from the US to be able to sell to China, but China thus far wants to focus on its own supply chain. So actually, we're seeing a knock to NVIDIA shares on the post-match analysis of this meeting.
That's what's fascinating to me is I think a lot of these folks were hoping to get some sort of a bump, and it hasn't really followed through, including with Boeing, who left with a deal to, correct me, I think it's to sell like 200 jets or something, but it's not as many as folks had hoped for. It may not be the wide-body aircraft they were hoping for. Chinese aviation is obviously a huge and growing market, but this wasn't as good of a sale as they wanted, and you've seen that reflected in the price.
Boeing's managed, apparently, to get an order for 200 aircraft. We don't know whether they're the 737 MAX. And most importantly is there were 500 being talked of. This is a company, though, that has sold less than 40 aircraft in the last decade to China. And this is because there is this ongoing tit for tat that China again wants to start building its own aircraft. To do that, they need engines and other parts of the supply chain to come from the United States. And so until they get access to some of those important parts, they're sort of limiting their purchase of Boeings. Now, the hope had been as far back as a year ago that they would get a 500 order. Now, we understand it's 200, according to the president. But the president did then go on Air Force One to say, well, maybe it might be up to 750. Look, we are again left wondering, mute from the actual CEO of Boeing as to really what has been agreed here. But there does seem to see some sense that they're gaining a little bit more access to the Chinese market once again. And it can only be good news if the two leaders of these countries are continuing to talk. And we know that, of course, President Xi is now perhaps due to come to the United States in autumn.
I want to go back to what you just said, that they're gaining a little bit more access to the Chinese market, because obviously for the president, that's his prevailing selling point for a lot of things, is we are going to be selling American goods. We're going to be bringing down this trade deficit. But I'm wondering if for these CEOs who, as you pointed out, are going to toe the party line, at least until they get off the plane, this was really about that a little bit, but much more about trying to preserve their own supply chains and their own ability to do business in China for the U.S. market, which really both these economies are kind of geared towards delivering.
It cannot be understated, the dominance of China and Taiwan, which is, of course, the key geopolitical elephant in the room here for U.S. supply chain. Look, 90% of all chips out there are manufactured in Taiwan. 90% of all processing of rare earths happens in China. Look, you can't use a smartphone. You can't have a magnet that goes into basically every single consumer electronics device you've ever used unless we have access to those rare earths from China. We are trying in the United States that you're seeing manufacturing trying to be brought onshore, and MP Materials getting stakes being built by the U.S. government in that company to be able to build up the ability to mine and process here in the U.S. But it's going to take years. For now, China and Taiwan remain a linchpin in the supply chain question mark, and that is really the leverage that China knows it has.
So talk about that. I mean, especially at a time when these massive processing chips are so critical to all of these AI companies and everything they're trying to do. The language coming out of the Taiwan debate wasn't really indicative of a president that's willing to take on that conflict. We heard very strong messaging from the Chinese side that they said this was a red line from them, sent out a statement before that meeting had even happened, making it clear that they had delivered that message, and not really equal pushback from the administration. Do you think these business leaders are nervous about that? Do you think that's something they're saying to the administration when cameras are not on? And how big of an impact could any conflict in Taiwan have on AI and chip manufacturing?
Look, this will significantly stifle AI compute build-out if we don't remain seeing access to Taiwan. Yes, TSMC, the key chip fabricator to the entire world, Taiwan Semiconductor, is bringing manufacturing prowess here to the United States and Arizona. But again, that takes time. That takes talent as well that needs to be built here in the country. And so on every single tech leader's mind, and really it should be on every consumer's mind, how important the relationship is with Taiwan, what China really wants out of Taiwan, and what so-called potential clashes that Xi Jinping articulated might really mean in the longer term. When pressed, President Trump said, look, we remain neutral. He was on Fox News talking about the fact that their view on the relationship with Taiwan has not changed. But what does that mean in terms of potential changes coming in the long term? Look, we have the likes of Palmer Luckey, who, of course, co-founder of Anduril, very outspoken tech leader. And he's often said, look, he thinks there in the next decade could be a significant ramping up in escalation between China and Taiwan. And what does that mean for the relationship with the United States? This has to be top of mind. It has to be something that CEOs are talking about in closed doors and trying to bend the ear of the president on.
I want to move a little bit to Cisco, because Cisco's CEO didn't get on the plane with all the rest of the kids and go on the fun field trip. But the company stock actually saw a huge jump this week, partially due to AI and some planned job cuts. Do you think Cisco at this point can compete with some of these other huge AI names that we're a little bit more familiar with in that space?
Yeah, Chuck Robbins. And there was a mistake that was made. Initially, it was announced that he was going to be going, and we're all scratching our heads, being like, so Jensen's not going, but Chuck is, but Chuck's got his earnings at that particular moment. They had to correct the market that, no, actually, he's got some talks with analysts and investors to be having. But boy, did those talks go well. Absolute soaring in the stock. We saw the biggest move up than we've seen in decades. We're seeing at one point an intraday high reach, 17% move, I think it was more broadly. And this is about networking. This is about what's happening within the data center, the processing of data. And also, he's got a really growing part of the business is all about cybersecurity, the securitization and governance of all these AI agents that everyone's busy spinning up with whatever they're doing at home and vibe coding. But more broadly, agents are becoming a real impact in the workforce, but you need to be able to ensure that that's safe and governed. And so this is the new era of Cisco. They're leaning in to producing their own silicon as well that will be going into those data centers for the networking that they're building out. But it means that they're having to reallocate resources. Up to 4,000 jobs could go. Look, that's only 5% of the business, but there's still humans, there's still people, there's still jobs and livelihoods that we talk about. But it's something that's happening more and more at the moment in terms of AI versus labor. At the moment, they're having to redeploy investment, trying to win the case that they are the future of AI, a storied Silicon Valley company that can really win in this current era of complete disruption.
Caroline Hyde there at Bloomberg Technology with an update on what we've seen of course, last week, those tech executives going to Beijing. Kevin Warsh has been confirmed as the next Federal Reserve Chair, but Jerome Powell is not going anywhere, at least not yet. Our Michael McKee with what's next for the Fed coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. The Supreme Court has rejected a bid by Virginia Democrats to revive a voter-approved map designed to flip Republican-held U.S. House seats. Now, our Virginia Supreme Court had decided that the map was adopted in violation to the state constitution. The ruling is a big setback to the Democratic hopes of countering Republican redistricting in other states ahead of this year's midterms. Now, meanwhile, thousands expected to gather in Montgomery, Alabama today in support for voting rights. Colorado Democratic Governor Jared Polis has reduced the state prison sentence of Tina Peters, allowing her to be eligible for parole on June 1st. Peters is a former county clerk convicted of tampering with election equipment and had been serving a 9-year state prison sentence. The decision follows a months-long pressure campaign from President Trump. And multiple outlets reporting that the U.S. could announce a possible criminal indictment of former Cuban President Raul Castro in the coming days. The investigation centers around the 1996 shoot-down of the planes that were operated by the humanitarian group Brothers to the Rescue. And President Trump expected to drop his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS. ABC says it would be in exchange for the creation of a $1.7 billion fund to compensate allies who they could claim that they were wrongfully targeted by the Biden administration. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Some headlines crossing the Bloomberg about that summit that President Trump and President Xi had, as we said at the top, we're kind of waiting for indications of what deals might have been agreed to and the
actual
details
deliverables from the deliverers.
Yes, it seems like we're getting some. Again, right now, just headlines about them. But China and the U.S. agreed to reduce tariffs on a certain range of products, reduce levies on a certain range of products. And the U.S. and China have reached arrangements on buying U.S. planes. This is something we were talking about with Stephen Engle just a few minutes ago. Boeing's commitment to buy a certain number of planes from Boeing underwhelmed the market, as you mentioned. Right,
exactly. And still waiting for specifics on, the president said there's an agreement to buy more soy. That's something that's very important to those farmers. That has not, we haven't seen specifics on that yet. And a couple of the other things the president talked about in his interview with Fox, we need to see details, and they haven't actually solidified yet. So we'll be keeping an eye on those.
More comes through here over the course of the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, late Friday, the Federal Reserve named Jerome Powell interim chair until his successor, Kevin Warsh, is sworn in as the new head of the central bank.
That's right. Powell's term officially officially ended on May 15th, but he has vowed to stay on as governor, a rare move that would deny President Trump a majority on the board. We talked to Bloomberg's Michael McKee about the reasons for that delay in getting Warsh installed.
When the Senate confirmed him, they have to send the paperwork down to the White House. President signs a commission for him, and that makes him officially able to be sworn in. But the president's been in China, so it's been put off for a few days. It doesn't really matter.
Interesting.
Jay Powell is still there if the world should come to an end and they need to put QE in for a few hours before we disintegrate. But Warsh could be sworn in this weekend, or he could be sworn in Monday. Basically, it's a done deal. We're just waiting for the ceremonial aspect of it.
And we know this is a president who likes to sign things. He does not like the auto pen,
Right.
as other regimes would have, administrations would have just had that done remotely. So what happens when Warsh does become chair? How long can Powell kind of hang out in his current role? And how long do you think he's going to stay? He said he's going to stay until he's sure this investigation is not going to come back. But does he ever going to have a guarantee that that's the case?
Well, that's a good question. He can stay legally until January 31st of 2028.
Okay.
That's the end of his term as a Fed governor. Does he want to stay that long? No. But does he trust the Department of Justice? No. And so he wants to make sure that once the Inspector General's report comes out, that even if he's cleared, that the Justice Department isn't going to find a pretext, as they've seemed to have done with James Comey, to try to bring him back into the whole legal morass. So he wants to stay there because it gives him some leverage over the president. Donald Trump wants him out. And he's not going to leave unless he has guarantees that Donald Trump isn't going to put him in jail. So until and unless that's settled, he'll still be there.
I mean, they did move a little bit on, saying for now they'd concluded this investigation and that allowed Powell to step down. But are you sensing any movement on codifying that, solidifying that into something that would be acceptable to Powell, to feel like he has some sort of guarantee to step away? What would that look like? An immunity promise? I mean,
well, it could be something like an immunity promise, or it could be that the Justice Department drops all investigations with what they call prejudice, which means they can't refile it. But what we've heard from Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., is that she's not giving up. That
she
might
very
file
open-ended.
charges again, and the president has said, yeah, well, we'll see where this goes. Nobody is saying it's over, and that's what they need to do to get Powell to leave.
So you have Stephen Myron, who either resigned or didn't resign. We're going to come back to that. But he had some interesting things to say about making room for Warsh to kind of own his tenure without Powell being. You can't have two leaders in charge of the same thing. Let's take a listen.
Transitions are important, and I think that it is maybe helpful to have someone there to give advice. But I still think it's important that it be a transition, because you want to have people's loyalties undivided. You want to have there be very clearly one chairman. You want to have a place where there's no question about who's in charge, and there's no talk of rival factions and things being split.
I mean, what's your take on that? There doesn't seem to be like there will be a real question about who's in charge, but there could be rival factions, and there could be a shadow government, depending on how people feel. Is there a risk with him sticking around?
Well, there's definitely a risk. Jay Powell's been there now as chair for 8 years.
Yeah.
And he's been on the Fed since 2012. So everybody knows him. Everybody has worked with him. And you could see rival power centers if Jay Powell wanted to push that. But Powell has made it clear he's not going to do that. He is going to be as low-key as possible. I would be somewhat surprised if he even makes a speech, because there's nothing to be gained from that. He can make his views known at the Fed meetings, but if he starts speaking out and there's any distance between him and Kevin Warsh, then people are going to say, well, which one really has the influence on the Open Market Committee? And so I don't think Powell wants to do that. He doesn't want to get into that kind of situation because he's such an institutionalist that would be bad for the Fed.
I was going to say, he does really seem to want to protect the institution and its relevance and its longevity. Can he be helpful to Warsh in the transition, and do you think he will help him take up the job?
Well, I think he can be. It's a little bit less than in some previous transitions because Kevin Warsh has been on the Fed before, but that was 12, 15 years ago. So he can steer him through some of the new things. I would be surprised if Kevin Warsh gets involved at all in the public aspects of this building investigation. But as the chair of the Board of Governors, he needs to know about it, so Powell can walk him through all of that. And basically, they've modernized and they've remodeled the Fed building since he was there last. He could show him where the men's room is.
Well, that'll be helpful. See, that's everyone's working together. All right, I do want to talk to you about actual monetary policy because we've got CPI and PPI for April. They're showing inflation is still stubbornly high. It's above the Fed's 2% target. Do you think this adds more pressure for a rate cut next month?
No, it takes the pressure completely off. Puts off a rate cut for quite some time because analysts have been saying, and on Friday, the markets started to believe them that this is going to be the case, that we're going to see higher for longer inflation. The Gulf is still closed. The Strait is still closed. And what they say is that even if it opened today, it would take a month or more to get oil back into the pipelines around the world. And so we're going to see these prices maintained. And there's no way that members of the Open Market Committee and no way the markets would permit you to start cutting rates now. So the best Warsh can do is just keep things where they are, not cut rates, not raise rates. There's a case building in the futures markets that they should raise rates, but that wouldn't do any good.
And the president would not enjoy that.
Raising rates would not open the Strait of Hormuz. So at this point, they're kind of stuck.
Inflation is now outpacing wage growth. What does that mean for consumers and the economy as a whole? We keep being told it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Is that starting to shake confidence slightly, a little bit?
Well, it certainly is starting to shake confidence at the lower levels, the whole K-shaped economy thing.
Our favorite phrase, everybody drink,
In the last month, the New York Fed came out with a study that said this is a real thing. And people at the lower ends are substituting chicken for meat, as the old economic choice saying goes, and they're cutting back on what they spend on, and so many people are having to pay more for gasoline now that it is getting tougher and tougher. We saw the savings rate decline in the last month, and we've seen credit card usage drop off a little bit in the lower deciles. So it's starting to seep into the economy, and it makes people feel worse. It's not shown up specifically in a lot of the consumption figures yet, the consumption data that we get, but it is showing up in the polls. So it is not just an economic problem to come, it's a political problem for the president right now.
We have to let you go, but before we do, when you're watching all those indicators, is there one you're looking at specifically that when that starts flashing red, you think all those other things will start to see signs of trouble in all those places you were just talking about?
Well, obviously the inflation numbers are kind of red lights right now. But looking down the road, you want to keep an eye sort of on jobless claims, because if they start to go up, they will generally go up very quickly because all the companies will have decided that we're going to lay people off now because demand has fallen. And you can sort of track that at the same time by looking at the consumption indicators, retail sales, the PCE spending report, and then all of the credit card companies put out data on whether people are spending more or less on their cards during a month. So watch the consumer and whether they still have jobs. And if we see some signs of cutting back, then you know you've got a real problem then.
Mike McKee, thank you so much.
Traveling with the president this week to China was Jameson Greer, the U.S. trade representative. He told Bloomberg News on Friday that China's exports of rare earths are improving, but there are still delays. As we've been discussing, rare earths are the backbone of modern tech. And as Bloomberg's Angus Bennett explains, China has cornered the global market.
It doesn't look like much, but this is the prize for the rest of the world in trying to catch up with China.
We need rare earths.
China owns them, processes them, refines them, and sells them. The entire supply chain is built around Beijing.
No matter what you do, you're always kind of beholden to China.
Rare earths are really the backbone of modern technology.
China's the ballgame. They're 80 to 90% of production and processing of rare earths that go into all equipment around the world.
And China's shown it will use that dominance as geopolitical leverage.
The main use of rare earths are in these powerful, high-performance magnets.
China's capacity for magnets is vast compared to the rest of the world.
When Donald Trump returned to the White House in 2025 and rebooted the US-China trade war, China responded with export controls on rare earths. that expose just how much Western manufacturing still depends on China's supply.
The automotive industry came out and not so quietly said, we are going to have to shut down factories if we cannot get these permanent magnets.
That shock set off a broader scramble to build a new supply chain from mine to magnet.
This is a story about not letting one country hold all the chips on what is a very important supply chain.
You can watch that whole documentary at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Originals channel on YouTube.
Well, the war in Iran has crippled global oil supplies. Now it could be impacting how much you pay to get your oil changed. Next on Bloomberg This Weekend, we're going to talk about new concerns for drivers as you try to hit the road.
And we're continuing to look at those headlines crossing about what deals are being announced on the heels of that summit between President Trump and President Xi. Some indications here. There are going to be deals on agriculture and other products. We're seeing here that China's going to promote the export of poultry from some states to China. Dig into that over the course of the morning as well here on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Stay with us.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Google's YouTube and Snap, well, they've reached agreements to settle a lawsuit from a Kentucky school district. The district claims that addiction to social media platforms, well, it's disrupted learning and pushed public schools to spend a massive amount of money fighting a mental health crisis. The case was set to go on trial on June 12th in federal court in Oakland, California. Elon Musk says he's not selling any SpaceX shares. That's in response to a user post that suggested he do so after a lockup period. It comes as sources tell Bloomberg the company is looking to file publicly for its long-awaited IPO as soon as Wednesday. Now, Reuters reporting SpaceX has picked NASDAQ for its IPO and will list under the ticker SPCX. In NBA action, the San Antonio Spurs advance to the Western Conference Finals after beating the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Knicks, they wait for their next opponent. Well, that's dragging on because the Detroit Pistons, they force a Game 7, beating the Cleveland Cavaliers. The PGA Championship continues in Pennsylvania. Maverick McNeely, Alex Smalley, they are tied at the top of the leaderboard, 4 under par. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the live play-by-play coverage today and tomorrow starting at 2 p.m. Eastern. And tonight, the Preakness Stakes gets underway at a new location. It's Laurel Park in Laurel, Maryland. Not in the running for the race is Kentucky Derby winner Golden Tempo. That's due to the short respite time between the Derby and the second leg of the Triple Crown. Christina and David, he just needs, a little rest. It's a little quick turnaround.
Yeah,
I like that they're enforcing that.
No Triple Crown winner, but I didn't know that they were moving the Preakness. Did you go to the Preakness when you were living in D.C.?
No, I always meant to, but never got there.
It's always a messy time. That's what I heard. Of the three, it's the messiest.
It's usually pretty rainy and kind of,
yeah.
But any excuse to wear a hat,
All right, fair enough.
I'll get us all hats next year.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, with the Strait still shut and global oil supplies stunted, the pump might unfortunately not be the only place consumers are going to experience supply chain pain. The conflict is also disrupting shipments of motor oil. According to Bloomberg's reporting, automakers and dealers are warning it could be harder to get certain synthetic oils these synthetic oils that are used in newer cars.
Yeah, now some repair shops say customers may soon see higher prices. That is, if they can keep the product on the shelves. Joining us now is the CEO of the Independent Lubricant Manufacturers Association. That's Holly Alfano, who joins us on this Saturday. Holly, great to have you with us. And Christina has a lot of questions about if she's going to be able to get the oil changed in her Mini Cooper. We'll get to those in just a moment.
David's making fun of me because I'm chronically bad at getting oil changes. But
let's talk about what we're talking about when we're talking about industrial lubricants. And I know we're dealing especially here with Group 3 base stocks. For those who don't know, what are they and why are they so critical? Why have they gotten so difficult for folks to get in light of the crisis in the Middle East?
Well, Group 3 base stocks are the oils that are used to make the lubricants that are for the modern internal combustion engine. So today's vehicles require Group 3 base stocks, and it's a formulation of about 75 to 98% of base oil to additive. So as you can see, without base stocks, we can't make the lubricants for vehicles.
What are we more worried about in the near term, higher prices or shortages?
Well, really both. We've already seen price increases on base oils, and unfortunately that normally gets passed on to consumers. What's going on actually is that one of the world's largest supplier of Group 3 was hit by an Iranian missile about 2 or 3 months ago, shortly after the war started. And that facility is going to be offline for the next 12 to 18 months.
Is that the LNG facility in Qatar, or is that a different one?
Correct, the one in Qatar. So 44% of Group 3 comes from the Middle East. You know, we always hear America is energy independent, but unfortunately not when it comes to lubricants. We rely on products from all over the world.
I know you've raised this concern with the government. The ILMA had a meeting with Energy Department officials, and you all characterized that as both productive and sobering. What is the Trump administration, what's the U.S. government prepared to do or doing here to make this less of a difficulty for Americans as this war continues?
Well, DOE is taking these concerns very seriously. They are elevating the issue within the department. We've had numerous discussions with them in recent weeks, and I think they're doing everything they can. Unfortunately, there's no easy answer to this situation. Not only is Group 3 constrained, but we're seeing other issues with different types of base oils that could be substitutions. So the whole oil market, when it comes to lubricants, has been disrupted. Normally, we might go to South Korea for Group 3, but South Korea relies on crude from the Middle East, and they can't get it. Group 2 could be diverted to make motor oils, but that right now that's in short supply because it's being used, the base stocks for that is being diverted toward diesel fuel production.
So what are you recommending? Should people try to go get their oil change now? Should people wait and stay on their regular schedule? Is it get it before it's gone? If you're driving around and that little oil light goes on your dash, what's the best course of action?
Well, I think people shouldn't panic. They should get their oil changed at the appropriate time when it's recommended, and make sure that you use the right product for your vehicle. Look at the manufacturer's manual and use the right product that is recommended. This will be corrected at some point. It's not going to be quick, but we're doing everything we can to make sure there are adequate supply. And we're working with the additive companies and the base oil suppliers, and hopefully consumers will be able to find the product that they need. It might just cost a little bit more.
The last time I got my oil change, you get the question each time is, do you want, regular oil or synthetic oil? And it makes me wonder, in the context of all of this, is that the solution here? Are we seeing, in light of this geopolitical conflict, a movement toward investment in kind of looking at new alternatives to traditional lubricants? Or where are we in moving beyond lubricants that depend on these elements from the Middle East?
Well, there is new supply coming online in the U.S. There's a facility in Pascagoula, Chevron's facility, and then Exxon's Baytown facility. They are both adding Group 3 capacity. That will be online hopefully toward the end of next year or so. Actually, we've asked DOE to look at working with them a little bit more to see if they can expedite the construction of those facilities, if there's anything they can do to ease permitting to get them online sooner. So we are, there's new capacity coming online. It's just going to be a matter of time.
So is there a specific brand or a specific type of engine that's going to be the first hit? I know there are different categories and different amounts of additives to some of these premium oils. I always get yelled at by using the cheapest version, as we were talking about, which isn't the best one. Where are you going to see these shortages first?
Today, the modern vehicle really relies on formulations that are made with Group 3, but there are some ways that The lubricant manufacturers can work with their additive suppliers to meet the API and other OEM specifications. We are actively working, our members are working on that. And the main thing is use the oil that is recommended by the manufacturer. Your car will run better, it will run longer, and it will be more reliable in the long term.
Holly, thank you.
It's a major investment, so you want to take care of it.
Appreciate the time on this Saturday. That's Holly Alfano there, the Independent Lubricant Manufacturers Association, joining us, talking about the difficulties facing that particular sector, ones I think a lot of us haven't talked about in light of how much we've been focusing on diesel, gasoline, oil, crude oil broadly, and natural gas.
We're starting to see the trickle, pardon the pun, of some of these downstream effects. Right? It's still in the oil area, but the more this goes on, petroleum products are used in so many things you don't even think about. We're going to start to see this in more and more sectors, and this is one of the first places I think that we're noticing it. All right, coming up, children are growing up in the social media age, and it's usually their parents who decide what gets uploaded and where. An important discussion about the future of influencer kids next.
Piper's mother, Tiffany Smith, is the momager.
She took these kids to massive viral fame. It seemed so innocent, but it wasn't innocent at all.
Some excerpts there from the show Bad Influence, The Dark Side of Kidfluencing. That gained millions of views last year on Netflix. A new book titled Like, Follow, Subscribe, Influencer Kids and the Cost of a Childhood Online looks at the life of kids online and the evolution of family influencing. The author of that book, Tessa Latif, joins us now. Great to have you with us. And let's start from an economic vantage if we can. I gather that the global influencer market is a $32.5 billion market. How much is this, a focus on the lives of children, yes, in America, but around the world, a component of that? What kind of business is this?
This is a massive business. Like you said, influencing is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the top strata of mom influencers and family vloggers can make millions or multi-millions of dollars a year.
I mean, that's so crazy to me because there's so different sides of this approach. I have friends who literally won't put their baby's face on the internet.
They'll put the star or
they put the star over their infant's face.
And I mean, the visage of the baby.
Listen, I love all your children, but I feel like at 2 weeks old, they all kind of look the same.
Okay.
But, so you've got friends who won't, Lisa's laughing from behind us. We've got friends who won't put any images of their children online. And then you've got other people who are putting every moment of their child online.
It's a wild binary.
Yeah, it seems like it's really, really extreme. Are there any rules or laws about how much you can put of your child online and how much money you make from their likeness?
So there are a few states now that have laws related to child influencers, but the laws are more related to the profits of the kids. So it's more like if you make this percentage of money off of the kids, then you have to save this percentage for a trust fund for them for when they turn 18. But there's nothing about what you can share and what you cannot share. So there aren't privacy protections per se.
The other part about even that is how do you divvy that up? Because if you're a momfluencer or a family influencer, couldn't you make the argument, well, the post is really about me, my kid just happens to be in it, so I don't need to save that money out for them?
Totally. It's really complicated to legislate this industry just because of the inherent nature of it. And it also happens within the home. So it's like when you talk about kid actors, they're going to set. So it's very clear the delineation between their work and their home. But for child influencers, a parent could say, is this really work for them? I'm just filming them as they go about their daily life. How does that count as work?
As you talk to folks who do this, I'm curious sort of how they start out. You mentioned some of them can make millions or multi-millions of dollars. How many of them are actually making that? So I guess there's probably a degree of aspiration here that you can make a ton of money off of your kid. But how often does that come to pass? How do people get into doing this?
Yeah. So honestly, it's kind of just how we are all playing the viral lottery every day, it feels like in America, where you're putting up some content. If it hits, then you kind of chase that high and keep trying to accomplish that again. But it is pretty rare to get up into that top strata, but I think it feels pretty democratic in a way where, let's say, like, in the past, if you wanted to do something like be a reality star, you had to get cast, right? You had to go through all these different things. Or if you had to be a child actor, you had to go audition first. But this is like, if you have a phone, you have a shot.
I mean, that's gratifying and also terrifying, I think. But, you know, we talk about kidfluencers, and I think the assumption for a lot of us is that their followers, especially if it's a solo kid dedicated account, less so the family ones, their followers are going to be other kids. But that's largely, it seems, untrue. Investigations by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal into the followers of kidfluencers, they found that their followers are overwhelmingly adults and mostly adult men. The Wall Street Journal followed one young teenage girl who started out just posting kind of dance pictures and then, to your point, went a little viral and became a de facto influencer, and her followers were 92% adult men. So what is the risk here for exploitations? Do these parents care, and do they care enough, in your opinion, about the risks involved in doing this?
There's a real risk, and we know that because of such incredible reporting and harrowing reporting by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal of predators watching this content. And when I talk to parents, they not only acknowledge the risk, but they know that it's a reality because they're getting messages, they're getting comments, they're getting emails, sometimes they're getting letters in the mail about, you know, with this kind of pedophilic, predatory intent. Yes, they're thinking about it. Do I think that it's changing their behavior in the way that it should? No. So I will never forget this one conversation I had with a mom influencer who had a 7-year-old daughter who was in dance competitions. And she said that she realized that she got more of these messages and her videos got more saves and more shares when her daughter was in these kind of revealing dance outfits. And so I asked her what she did with that knowledge. And she said, oh, I only share it a few times a year now. So that kind of was difficult for me to understand as a parent. If you know people are looking at your child with predatory intent, that your answer isn't, okay, I'm not going to share this anymore, but I'll just do it a few times a year.
I'll do it less.
Protesta, we have a minute left, but let me ask you about the moment that we're in. So you talked about the difficulty of regulating this at a legislative level. We've seen these social media trials in California and elsewhere. Is that likely to change what parents are allowed to do, what's allowed to be posted on these apps?
I don't think so, because I think in the United States, we so prize parental rights almost above anything else. And it's really difficult to go into someone's home and say, this is not something you can do with your child. And, you know, parents consent to all kinds of things that children can't consent to. And this is kind of just an outgrowth of that, the inherent nature of the parent-child relationship.
Protesta, thanks for the time on this Saturday. Appreciate it. That's Protesta Latifi. She's the author of the book Like, Follow, Subscribe, Influencer Kids and the Cost of a Childhood Online. Fascinating look at this industry. And really I think we have to call it that, given the size and the amount of money that's poured into it. But also, as you pointed out, Christina, the kind of very startling and sobering aspects of what's happening in these corners of the internet.
And the trade-off of doing this.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're coming up on 9 a.m. in New York.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, President Trump back at the White House after his trip to China.
We made great deals. We did great trade deals. We have great relationships. And a lot of things have happened and you'll be hearing about them.
What he's saying about Taiwan, chip manufacturing, and AI.
Polls open this morning for primary voters in Louisiana. A Trump-backed Maha Republican is challenging the chair of the Senate's powerful Health Committee. Could the pharma and healthcare industries lose an ally?
And breaking overnight, workers for the Long Island Railroad on strike.
We cannot responsibly make a deal that implodes the MTA's budget.
What workers are demanding and how the MTA is responding as trains stop running on the nation's busiest commuter railroad. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We're coming to you live from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, May 16th, and we are hearing this morning some breaking news. We got some red headlines across the terminal talking about some solidification of those promised agreements coming out of that Trump-Xi summit.
Seeing those deliverables kind of enumerated, at least in headline form there. Still looking for really granular details about what all of it means, but indications that there's going to be lessening of some of those tariffs that have been put in place and some pressures to kind of boost exports of poultry and other agricultural products. All of these announcements that we've kind of waiting for, Christina, since this trip concluded. We knew that it would take some time to get those formal announcements.
That's right. We're going to unpack all that shortly, but first we want to catch you up on the headlines with Lisa Mateo.
And let's start there, guys. President Donald Trump back at the White House after returning from a 3-day trip to China to meet with President Xi Jinping. Now aboard Air Force One, he spoke to reporters about trade deals.
Made a lot of great trade deals, including over 200 planes from Boeing with a promise of 750 planes, which will be by far the largest order ever if they do a good job with the 200, which I'm sure they will. And that's General Electric also, the engines. So they're buying General Electric. So it's approximately 450 engines, 200 planes, and a promise of up to 750 if they do a good job.
All right, according to a statement from China's Commerce Ministry, Beijing and Washington will adopt a series of measures, including mutually cutting levies on certain products to expand bilateral trade in areas including agriculture. To the conflict in the Middle East, where Israel has carried out strikes on Gaza City, killing Hamas's most senior military leader. That's according to the Israel Defense Forces and Israeli Security Agency. Emergency services in Gaza say the strikes killed at least 7 people, with more than 50 others injured. The Pentagon drawing down thousands of troops in Europe by stopping units from deploying to Poland and Germany. Several U.S. officials, they tell the Associated Press that 4,000 troops from an army brigade are no longer en route to Poland this week. The Trump administration had previously said it was cutting U.S. forces only in Germany. Service on the nation's largest commuter railway has come to a halt as workers on New York's Long Island Railroad, well, they go on strike. The MTA and unions, they failed to come to an agreement on raises and issues like health care contributions. Union member Dwayne O'Connor says it's not the best situation.
I feel terrible. Terrible. This is going to hurt. This is going to hurt the island. This is going to hurt the city. You know, they think they could push us around, and we're supposed to just fall in line. All we're asking for is fair wages.
More than 270,000 daily riders rely on the service to travel between New York City and Long Island. Judy Sarin, she lives on Long Island.
I have family that comes out on the train almost every weekend to visit, and this will be difficult because they will have to drive, which is also challenging.
The MTA said it will produce free shuttle buses. This is the first strike on the railroad since 1994, when a 2-day suspension shut down the service. And Louisiana voters, they will take part in a revamped and stripped down state primary today. Republican Senator Bill Cassidy is running for a 3rd term in a field that includes State Treasurer John Fleming and U.S. Representative Julia Letlow, who was endorsed by President Trump back in January. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. We are following that breaking news this morning. China and the U.S. agreeing to lower some levies on products to promote bilateral trade. That's according to China's Commerce Ministry. The announcement comes after President Trump traveled back to Washington from Beijing yesterday.
All right, joining us now is Bloomberg White House reporter Courtney Subramanian. Back again to try to break down what we were seeing. Look, we were talking to you earlier in the last couple hours about waiting for these deliverables. We're now starting to see some details, or at least details about details coming out from the Chinese side. Have we heard any solidified agreements from the White House, from the U.S. side? And what are we waiting for still to get some details on?
Concepts of a deal, which is a pretty
exactly well done.
Yeah, we're starting to hear from the Chinese. They did agree to lower tariffs on a certain range of products. They referenced the agricultural sector. They did confirm the plane deal, although they didn't give specifics that the president referred to yesterday on the way back from Beijing. We are still waiting to hear from the White House a bit more. Again, the details remain scant here. And I think until we have more, we can't really break down just how much economic cooperation there is here. I think some of this is signaling, of course.
Courtney, it's a quiet weekend for the president. He has executive time, as he calls it, today and tomorrow, but nothing else on the official schedule. How is the White House contextualizing the trip that just wrapped up here? I think a lot's been made of the closeness of the relationship as the U.S. sees it, or as the administration sees it, between President Trump and President Xi. And they've nodded to the fact that there's been this invitation for President Xi to come to the States in September, and there'll be these other opportunities on the heels of that for these two leaders to get together. How much emphasis are they placing on these deliverables amidst some criticism, I think, that maybe the numbers weren't as big as a lot of people, especially on Wall Street, thought they would be, and there wasn't kind of a dialing back of the tariffs that were put in place to the extent that a lot of people expected?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was huge expectation going into this that this was going to largely focus on, stabilizing trade, talking about Iran and any cooperation the U.S. could get with China there in terms of, international support. But I think the White House has so far framed this as a huge success. We heard from the president yesterday. He has praised it as a fantastic visit. He very much was, regaled by all the pomp and pageantry that she had rolled out for him. But a lot of this, as you said, we saw Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Rep Jamieson Greer sort of lay the groundwork for some of the deals that we've heard about so far, talking about setting up a board of trade to, open up investment in non-critical sectors. Again, we had expected with the cadre of CEOs, U.S. CEOs, attending this summit that there would be more deals on opening up China's market. We haven't yet to see that. I think there was huge expectation that AI would be a huge talking point with the last minute addition of NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, who jumped on Air Force One in Alaska. But none of that seemed to come to fruition. And, we'll be watching in the days ahead to see if any of those deals, anything along those sort of deals might materialize from the White House.
Courtney, don't go anywhere. We want to bring in Jennifer Welch. She's Bloomberg Economics Chief Geoeconomics Analyst. The other thing that I feel like, Jennifer, we didn't hear as much about and we're expecting to, or a lot of industry folks were hoping to, was some more cooperation on critical minerals. China has really the lockdown not only on the actual minerals themselves, but almost all of the refinement now is done there in the processing, even when they're coming from other places, including Australia. Do we make any progress there? Is there any inclination that this was even discussed to a significant amount? And if not, what does that mean?
You're absolutely right. That was kind of the elephant in the room, that China wields this massive leverage over critical minerals. It was the focus of a showdown between the U.S. and China last year after President Trump hiked tariffs. And even though China has put in place licensing and other regulations to allow the flow of many of those minerals to resume to the United States, there are still restrictions, particularly on those that are headed for defense end uses. And that's obviously a concern if the United States is going to need to bring back stockpiles of munitions it's used up in Iran. And also this lingering question of some regulations that China has put in place over the last few months that seem to be aimed at frustrating any efforts by the U.S. or its allies to de-risk and to develop alternative, diversified supply chains away from China. But as you mentioned, that didn't seem to come up in the meeting, and there's no clarity on whether there's going to be any further relaxation from the Chinese side or if this is going to continue to be a focal point of tensions.
Jennifer, let me focus on another supply chain I know you've been paying very close attention to for a long while now, and that's the supply chain involving chips, especially those that are made on Taiwan. Of course, Taiwan did come up, brought up first by President Xi, and we've seen President Trump talk more about it on the heels of President Xi's comments, although there was a delay in terms of the U.S. responding to what the Chinese president had to say. But in an interview with Bret Baier on Fox News, the president was asked about that supply chain, the chip supply chain in Taiwan, and here's what he had to say.
I'd like to see everybody making chips over in Taiwan come into America, because to be honest with you, I think it's the greatest thing you can do, because it's a heated situation. There's no question about it. And as you know, we have massive amounts of chip companies now from Taiwan already coming in. We expect to have 40 to 50% of the world chip business by the end of my term. And I think it should be even more than that. I think all of those chip companies, if they're smart, they're going to start heading to Arizona and the places where they're building. That's going to solve your problem.
That's going to solve your problem, the president said. So, Jeffers, kind of situate that in the broader conversation surrounding Taiwan. I think there are probably a lot of lawmakers who are a bit startled by the fact that there wasn't a more forceful message from President Trump about Taiwan, about this weapons deal, and then you had him really expounding quite a bit here on this one commercial side of that relationship. Your reaction to it, and again, kind of, I'd love for you to situate that in the broader conversation about the relationship as it stands.
So I think heading into the summit, there was a lot of concern, including for myself as someone who used to be charge with writing these talking points for the president about what the discussion on Taiwan would be, because it requires really careful, delicate language. And President Trump is known from straying from formal talking points. I think what you heard, including in that interview and what he said on the ground, including to reporters, wasn't necessarily the worst case scenario for Taiwan, but it was far from a full-throated defense of both U.S. policy to support Taiwan's defense and the idea of deterring China from ever testing that proposition. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. First, Trump has always been skeptical about supporting Taiwan and other partners. That's something that actually Bloomberg News has reported on for years, including when he was last on the campaign trail. The second factor is I think he's quite cognizant of China's leverage over critical minerals. And he probably heard not just publicly from Xi and remarks before the meeting began, but privately and behind closed doors, how Beijing is quite concerned about U.S. arms sales, especially this reported $14 billion package that is apparently waiting on President Trump's signature. He was pretty non-committal on what he would do with that package once he gets back in Washington. And that alone is a deviation from U.S. policy, which is to support Taiwan's defense, including through arms sales, and not negotiate those sales with Beijing.
Courtney, I also want to ask you about the visit that's coming on the heels of this visit, and that's President Putin has announced this morning that he will be heading to Beijing for a visit as well. There is this theory, and Putin has allegedly been a big proponent of this theory of spheres of influence. His argument is that Russia should get free rein in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, China should get free rein in Asia, and the President Trump and the Americans can handle our own hemisphere. This has been an argument that, depending on the day or who's been in front of them, the president seems to be amenable to, if not all in so far. What does it say to you that Putin is going to meet with Xi, two people who would very much like the U.S. to take a step back in both of those theaters right on the heels of this summit? And I wonder who you think they'll be talking about while they're in the room together.
Well, the obvious answer is Donald Trump, of course, right? So, this is something President Putin said. He was watching Trump's visit very closely. It should come as no surprise that he would want to follow up with a visit to Xi to make sure they're completely aligned. To your point about the spheres of influence, that is something that the U.S. Largely agreed with in the national security statement they released last year, in which they wanted to reassert U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. They've, of course, seemingly gotten a little distracted in Iran. But this is something that I'd expect. It didn't come as a surprise to me to hear that Vladimir Putin would be traveling to China on the heels of Donald Trump's visit.
Courtney, you've taken us right to where I wanted us to go. And Jennifer, I want to ask you just about the broader strategy the U.S. has toward China, and maybe to tee up that part of this conversation. Let me play a bit of sound that our colleague Michelle Hussein had a conversation with Kishore Mahbubani, the former president of Singapore. Let's hear what he had to say about the role that the U.S. is playing vis-a-vis China and how much success the U.S. could have kind of keeping China at bay.
It's not wise policy of the United States to stop the rise of China because China can no longer be stopped. And the only way to stop China is to ask the Chinese government to stop improving the livelihood of its own people, right? If you want China, that's the only way that China will stop growing. But China still has a long way to go. Its per capita income is way behind that of the United States. There's a long way to go.
I misspoke there, Mahbubani, the former Singaporean diplomat. But Jennifer, let me go to you on that point. As Christina talks about these spheres of influence, how even are those spheres? How much influence do you see the U.S. having here? And how much time and attention and eagerness does the U.S. under President Trump have to stop China to the degree that it can?
Well, I think that's a major risk in Trump's second term, especially with the ongoing war in the Middle East, which is quite literally pulling time, resources, and energy out of the Indo-Pacific and directing them towards the Middle East, including missile defense systems that, for example, our Asian allies very much depend on. And what that's symbolic of is something that's been a trend in U.S. foreign policy for over a decade now, which is a desire to want to focus on the Indo-Pacific, the world's most dynamic economic region, home to places, as you mentioned, David, Taiwan, critical supply chains, and yet constantly getting pulled in other directions and distractions. And I think that continues to be a theme here, even though President Trump just made this trip to China. What's interesting is he didn't stop anywhere else along the way. And that's sort of a departure from precedent. Normally, U.S. presidents make a China trip part of a larger trip to the region and use it as an opportunity to signal U.S. presence everywhere there. And in this case, that was sort of a missed opportunity.
Christina, you were there when Trump walked across the border into North Korea.
I was, and that was a multi-part trip as well. And I covered Pompeo the first term. And every time we went to Asia, we stopped in Vietnam. Every single time, we always hit different places the U.S. was trying to get agreements with. Courtney, very quickly before we let you go, we've pivoted to Asia. We've pivoted back. He's back in D.C., the president doing executive time. What is next up on the agenda as far as foreign policy meetings go with the president?
Well, I think we'll be watching to see if the president follows through with a call to Taiwan's President Lai. He made reference to this. He said he needed to speak to the person who is running Taiwan, which appeared to be a reference to President Lai. So we'll be watching to see if that phone call happens. That, of course, would draw China's ire. But I expect we'll also hear the president speaking to a lot of Republicans who are trying to shape what happens next and push Trump towards signing off on this arms deal.
All right, Courtney Superman and Jennifer Welch, thank you both for making us a bit smarter this morning. We appreciate you being with us.
All right, the UK Prime Minister fighting for his political survival after a brutal election and a series of resignations, the latest on the political unrest for America's closest ally. That is straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend, which you can find on Bloomberg Television, on Bloomberg Radio, at Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app. Again, tracking all of the latest developments, including those out of President Trump's trip to China, as we learn new developments about those deliverables that came out of meetings the President of the United States had with the President of China. More to come here on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. The Supreme Court has rejected a bid by Virginia Democrats to revive a voter-approved map designed to flip Republican-held U.S. House seats. Now, Virginia Supreme Court had decided that the map was adopted in violation of the state constitution. The ruling is a big setback to Democratic hopes of countering Republican redistricting in other states ahead of this year's midterms. Now, meanwhile, thousands expected to gather in Montgomery, Alabama today in support for voting rights. Colorado Democratic Governor Jared Polis has reduced the state prison sentence of Tina Peters, allowing her to be eligible for parole on June 1st. Peters is a former county clerk convicted of tampering with election equipment and had been serving a 9-year state prison sentence. The decision follows a months-long pressure campaign from President Trump. And multiple outlets reporting that the U.S. could announce a possible criminal indictment of former Cuban President Raul Castro in the coming days. The investigation centers around the 1996 shoot-down of that plane that was operated by the humanitarian group Brothers to the Rescue. And it comes as President Trump ramps up pressure on the island, with CIA Director John Ratcliffe visiting Cuba for talks with top leaders. Cuba says the country has completely run out of the diesel and fuel oil it needs to keep its power plants running, plunging much of the island into darkness and sparking protests. David and Christina, over to you.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Now to another part of the world. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he plans to, quote, get on with governing after his party suffered brutal losses in local council elections last week. Now, even though the results of that race don't have bearing on Parliament, pressure is mounting from within Starmer's own party for him to step down.
Join us now to explain how we got here and what Starmer's odds are for keeping his job as our in-house Brit. That's Dave Merritt, Bloomberg Senior Executive Editor, and frankly, our boss. Not the only reasons that we're having
no stress here whatsoever
today. We got these photographs this morning. Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, out for a run.
Yeah.
Wearing a shirt from a 2022 10K that he ran. A lot of interest in him, man of the people. We have you. We don't have Lizzie Burton here. If Lizzie were here, I'd ask her, what is Manchesterism? This is a thing we keep hearing a lot about, and he's going to have to define it. But as he kind of makes this bid, or we assume he will, what is his brand of politics that he's bringing forward?
I think that is what everyone's asking, and I think he's obviously much less familiar this side of the Atlantic. He's been a politician for a long time. He was in Tony Blair's cabinet back in the day. But for the last few years, he's been the mayor of Manchester. And the King of the North is one of the other nicknames.
I've seen that
he
a couple
likes
places,
to bandy around. And look, Manchester as a city has been booming economically.
Yeah.
It's been outpacing the rest of the country. And how much is that attributable to Andy Burnham's policies? That can be debated, but he's very, very popular as politicians go. Not many of them are very popular these days, as you know. But when you look at the range of options that Labour have got after this disastrous local election result that you just referenced, he seems to be the person that everyone thinks might have the best chance of beating these insurgent parties, because of course British politics is fracturing. You've got Reform, led by Nigel Farage, and a rising Green Party, led by this guy called Zach Polanski, and they're eating votes on the left and the right, the Labour Party, to the extent that it's looking impossible for them to win next time. Remember, this is just 2 years, not even 2 years, after a huge landslide victory for the Labour Party. And this is one of the extraordinary things in British politics now, is that no one seems to be able to run the country for very long, even with a huge landslide, before their position has been questioned. It looks like they're going to have to resign.
Well, let's step back for a sec, because how did we get here? And is this a fait accompli? Is he done? And how long? Are we talking Liz Truss head of lettuce duration, or can he hang in there and still fight for his job?
As I've checking this morning, there are no British papers with some perishable goods on the cover.
It hasn't happened yet.
Counting down the days, because Starmer is saying he's going to stay in post. We have a bit of a timeline. Actually, I recommend, this is a bit of a thorny tale, I recommend going to Bloomberg.com this morning. Alex Wickham, who's our political editor in London, has written a piece. It's a big take today on Bloomberg.com. It's called How Keir Starmer Imploded. There it is. And it traces us back to that landslide victory in July 2024, where he suddenly seemed to have all this power, and very quickly, through a series of missteps and decisions, his authority has been ebbing away.
And then perhaps some self-owns, where he reversed course on like 3 major
U-turns with some things as well, policies that were unpopular. And of course, probably the biggest one of all was to do with right here in America. It was the US ambassador, Peter Mandelson. A Bloomberg investigation revealed that his ties with Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, had continued after Epstein's conviction, and that the government knew a little bit more about that than they led on when they appointed him as ambassador to the United States. That caused a huge scandal in Britain, and really was the moment, I think, where everyone felt this can't really go on, and his authority had been so undermined. That was several months ago. Cut back to last week, where things really kicked into gear. We had Wes Streeting, who was the health secretary, resigning from the cabinet right on the day, or the news was leaked on the day the King was making his speech. So kind of designed for maximum impact, undermining the government's agenda right there. He's gone for the cabinet with a letter saying that the current situation isn't sustainable. And now you have Andy Burnham, Mr. Manchester, King of the North, standing to get back into Parliament. One of the Labour MPs has stepped aside, given up their job, and vacated this seat. There will be what we call a by-election in Britain, a special election. If he wins that, by the way, that's a big if, because he's got to win that seat against a very popular Reform Party in that part of Britain, then there will be a contest, we assume, for the Labour.
And he's got to do that to be eligible.
So he's got to be that to be eligible. He's got to be in Parliament. So we've got a bit of a kind of a slightly complex sequence of events, and kind of an unprecedented one. So this special election in a constituency in the north of England is potentially going to decide who the next Prime Minister is. I don't think we've ever been here before.
What is his appetite for this so much? Is he being coy about this? We had Bridget Phillipson coming out and backing his return to Westminster today, so a cabinet member doing all of that. As we see Starmer adamant that he's sticking with this. Is Andy Burnham out front saying that he wants this to be the case? So are the knives out, I guess is what I want to know.
Yeah, the knives haven't been quite out in the open. I think they're still kept in the sheaths. The sheaths at this point. And you've got cabinet members saying things like, well, we need our best players on the pitch, if we're going to beat Reform. But, Andy Burnham had a go at getting a seat just a few months ago, and it was blocked by Keir Starmer's allies who run the Labour Party. Said, no, you cannot do this, because it was seen as too much of a risk. And again, now that they're saying, fine, you can go ahead, it shows even more that his power and authority has been leaching away. And maybe in public he is saying he's going to keep fighting and is going to keep on with the job and all these things. But in private, perhaps, you assume if he's allowing Andy Burnham so easy to come back in, there's an acceptance that maybe his time might be up.
And Nigel Farage is doing what at this point? Sitting back and smiling?
That's my other question. Is there a
cigarette
risk?
and a pint, as he normally does.
Is there a risk that, this not quite out in the open infighting, or uncertainty in labor could give even more momentum and seats to Farage as we come, up in a general.
I think that's exactly the point. You know, when they won this big landslide, Keir Starmer stood up and said, the psychodramas of the Tory party are over. We're the grown-ups back in the room. You can trust us not to descend into infighting and turfing up. And look where we are. Just 2 years later, it's a carbon copy. Now, if you're Nigel Farage, you're informed, say, look, they're all the same. Labour, Tory, the old parties, they are dead. They are yesterday's news. Come and vote for us. We're the party to bring you the sort of reform that will make your lives better. That's the argument they're making. That's the argument they kind of won in those local elections. They stole councils from both the Tories and Labour across the country, 1,500 or so council seats. So Farage will be sitting thinking, I've got quite a good chance of actually beating Andy Burnham. So it's kind of a lose-lose for Keir Starmer, this special election. If Andy Burnham wins, okay, maybe Labour can defeat reform under a Burnham government, but Starmer's job is probably toast. If they lose, then no one can beat reform. And there's going to be a huge amount of existential angst within the Labour Party and the Tories as well, that Nigel Farage is unstoppable.
Let me go back to the special relationship and to Alex Wickham's fine TikTok that you mentioned that's on the Bloomberg today, and read a little bit from it. A person close to Starmer blamed Trump as singularly responsible for the failure of his premiership. They say, from the moment Trump was elected, the international crises that followed meant it was impossible for the prime minister to focus on the domestic priorities of voters. What if that has changed? Why, with a new prime minister, won't the circumstance be the same, that we're still in a world in which the whims and efforts of President Trump stand to scuttle any sort of domestic policy making or priorities that a prime minister would have in place?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably quite easy, isn't it, to blame Donald Trump to kind of, for the failure of the premiership. I think it's a bit of a stretch. I think, Keir Starmer has departed from the norm of British prime ministers over the last decades in not joining the American administration in a conflict. I mean, Tony Blair, of course,
Iraq,
in the Iraq War, and Tony Blair came out and was quite vocal. Even that cost him his job, arguably, as well. But he came out and said, really, you have to follow America. The special relationship is too important. But it's very unpopular with the British public. So Keir Starmer took a different tack there. I would argue, actually, that sort of shored up his standing with the British public a little bit. There's a bit of that sense of, well, you've got to sometimes stand up for what you believe in versus just following. Donald Trump is very unpopular in Britain, so I don't think tagging your policies to him is a pathway for success. And you can be sure that Andy Burnham, who is even more known to be slightly more on the left of the party, I don't think he's going to be tacking any closer to the Republicans if he takes office as well.
I always found it a very interesting fail-safe in British politics that, you elect the party and then they kind of internally choose who leads the country. It's such a foreign concept to us in the U.S., but it's a nice bit of a fail-safe in that if the guy is not delivering even internally, you can vote him out. But the problem is you guys have had 5 prime ministers in the last 10 years.
That's the flip side.
Is your fail-safe causing instability?
It is causing instability. There's been lots of articles written in the last few days. Is Britain ungovernable? Can anyone really pull together the sort of coalition that's needed to have any sort of longevity in office of the sort that we saw with Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair, who won 3 elections? It's sort of unimaginable these days. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to personality and communication as well. Keir Starmer did win a big election victory, but actually when you looked under the hood of the numbers, it was kind of a broad but shallow victory. A lot of people had very thin majorities. And remember, the Tories have been in power for all this time, the psychodramas, Brexit, and you could argue that he won kind of in spite of himself, really. He won just because it was anybody but the Conservatives. So it was never built on the strongest foundations, this particular administration or this particular Labour Prime Minister. But, someone with the personality, this is what they hope. Someone like Andy Burnham, who has proved to be that he has longevity in Manchester. Can you replicate that? But of course, Boris Johnson, he was another mayor.
That's what I was just thinking of,
again, came into power with a big landslide. And then not long after, again, that power dissipated. And that parliamentary mechanism that you just referenced kicks into gear and people decide that they have to tough them out.
I saw Jeremy Corbyn expressing some sympathy for Keir Starmer in The Guardian this morning. In the minute that we have left with you, a big theme of Alex's piece is the rise of nationalism throughout the UK. How much does that stand to kind of shape British politics here this year?
Right as we speak, there are 2 marches going on in London, and the police have a huge operation to try to keep them apart. One is this one led by this nationalist Tommy Robinson called Unite the Nation, and the other one is a pro-Palestine march. So, and there are many, many people, there's many police trying to keep the order on the streets. You know, there is a lot of emotion in this. Farage taps into this very effectively, and we've seen that success he's had at the ballot box. Andy Burnham's message is going to be to try to unite things and create a coalition. We're going to have to see if that's possible.
And we'll check in with you as it develops, no doubt. Dave Merritt, Senior Executive Editor at Bloomberg News, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And be sure to check out the piece we mentioned, and I've got right here in my notes, how Keir Starmer imploded and plunged Britain into more chaos. That's on the terminal, or of course, on Bloomberg.com.
Well, for the first time in more than 30 years, workers at the nation's largest commuter railroad have gone on strike. The latest on negotiations to avoid a Monday morning commuter nightmare in New York, in the city, and on Long Island, as we see the Long Island Railroad coming to a standstill here at the beginning of a busy week and a busy summer. So many people relying on that railroad.
A lot of people hoping that get resolved.
To get out east to the Hamptons and other destinations on Long Island. We'll talk with a reporter who covers the MTA and the LIRR coming up next year on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, at Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. Stay with us.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on today's top stories. Elon Musk says he's not selling any SpaceX shares. Now, that was in response to a user post that suggested he do so after a lockup period. It comes as sources tell Bloomberg the company is looking to file publicly for its long-awaited IPO as soon as Wednesday. Reuters is reporting SpaceX has picked NASDAQ for its IPO and will list under the ticker SPCX. In NBA action, the San Antonio Spurs advanced to the Western Conference Finals after beating the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Detroit Pistons, they force a Game 7 beating the Cleveland Cavaliers. In baseball, the Yankees defeated the Mets 5-2 in the opening game of the Subway Series that took place at Citi Field. They play again tonight. The PGA Championship continues in Pennsylvania. Maverick McNeely and Alex Smalley, they are tied at the top of the leaderboard at 4 under par. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the live play-by-play coverage today, tomorrow, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And tonight, the Preakness Stakes gets underway at a new location, Laurel Park in Maryland. Not running in the race, though, Kentucky Derby winner Golden Tempo. Bloomberg's The Close spoke with the trainer of that horse, Cherie DeVoe, about why.
The ultimate decision was just, were we going to focus on the Triple Crown for Golden Tempo, or are we going to focus on his year?
Yeah, so the horse needed some time to rest. DeVoe made history as a first female trainer to win the Kentucky Derby. David and Christina.
A lot of bourbon there behind Cherie DeVoe.
You noticed that, did you?
She should celebrate on the
She's
heels of that
earned
Kentucky
it.
Derby
She's
win.
100%
Absolutely.
earned it. All right, Lisa, thank you so much. In less cheerful news, North America's largest commuter rail system is facing a major commuter disruption this weekend. Trains have come to a standstill as the MTA and unions representing the roughly 3,500 Long Island Railroad workers are trying to reach a deal. But in the meantime, nearly 300,000 daily riders waiting to see where things are going to fall and just how long it's going to take to resolve this.
Right now we see workers picketing outside of Penn Station. Bloomberg News reporter Michelle Caskey joins us now. She's been following all of this. Let's just start with what this disagreement principally is about. You have workers for the LIRR who wanted higher wages. They say what? In keeping with inflation. Essentially, costs have gone up, their salaries have not.
That's right. I mean, they're experiencing the higher prices at the grocery store and at the gas station, and they're saying, look, to keep up with inflation, please give us, we really want, close to 5%.
Okay.
And that's down from their original ask. So they have gone a little bit below 5%, but the MTA is saying, look, we can't afford to give you that unless we do some drastic things on the Long Island Railroad.
And can't afford to give you that because were they to do it, they say, prices would go up for commuters?
Absolutely. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which oversees the Long Island Railroad, they're saying, look, we would need to raise fares a lot more to be able to cover the wage increases that you're asking for, or we would need to cut back on service or maybe reduce headcount, something like that.
So when we were talking about this earlier this week in our meetings, I said, this is a New York story. We're a global broadcast. This is just because you all take this train that you want to do this story. But I got argued down, I think, successfully, because why does this story matter across the country? To me, it's so indicative of this kind of dispute you're having in so many cities. They're trying to sustain beleaguered transit programs. I know there was a similar argument in D.C. with the Metro.
Philadelphia as well.
With the BART. Yeah, like all Why does this keep happening?
It's a huge issue. I mean, these systems, these transit systems, they're very expensive to run, and they always rely on outside help from the state or the local government, whether it's sales tax revenue or something to help augment the fare box revenue that comes in, because the fare box revenue alone won't cover everything. So, and that's part of MTA's and Long Island Railroad's argument here is, look, if the wages go up too much, what happens is then we have to not just go back to the riders, but go back to taxpayers and say, look, we need to raise your taxes to help pay for some of these wage increases. Now, on the other hand, you know, the unions, the workers, they haven't had a raise in almost 4 years because there has been these ongoing negotiations for several years now about changing the contract and amending the contract. So, you know, they're feeling the higher prices as well. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what the consequences of this are going to be. So I think Tom DiNapoli, the comptroller, said we're looking at, $61 million in lost economic revenue each day that this drags on. Christina laying out at the top the amount of people who rely on the LIRR day in and day out. What's Monday morning going to look like, and what's the leadership of this transit agency saying about how they're going to try to compensate so much as they can for those who need to get to work or elsewhere?
Definitely. I mean, you mentioned the 61 million. That's an estimate per day. You know, there's a lot of small businesses that'll be affected by this. We're just a week away from Memorial Day weekend. That is the start of the summer season out on Long Island. A lot of people in the city head out there for the beaches. They go to the Hamptons. They have a lot of fun. That is really, if this strike continues, that's going to affect that summer tourism season that the island and the local economy there rely on so much. And again, you were talking about the alternative service on Monday morning. Yeah, Monday morning looks pretty rough.
This is buses.
This is shuttle buses.
Oh,
it looks pretty rough. But for their MTA transit officials, they're encouraging people to work from home if they can. But we know there's also a lot of people that's not an option. You know, if you're working at a hospital, if you're, you know, providing an essential service, you've got to get to work, and you have to be there in person. So the roads there's going to be more cars on the road, which is not good. Long Island already has a lot of traffic.
Notoriously easy to get around by car.
And then what is happening is starting Monday morning for the peak AM and PM rush hours, MTA is providing shuttle services, shuttle buses at 6 different locations on Long Island that'll take you to subway stops, subway stations in Queens.
Mm-hmm. As a longtime once Metro rider in D.C., I am very familiar with the subway to bus to subway situation. It makes no one in a good mood. Are they any closer to reaching a deal? Do you think this could be resolved by Monday?
We're trying to find out if there's another meeting scheduled for today. It was pretty heated yesterday. It went all the way to midnight. Yeah. Some words I'm sure were shared across the table, so they might need, you know, a little bit of a breather. But we're hoping that they get back together at the table again today and continue talking, so this can get wrapped up as soon as possible.
You quote in your piece Kevin Sexton, the National Vice President of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. We do not know the duration of the strike at this time, so a bit ominous. How illustrative is the strike that we saw last year, I guess it was, in New Jersey? We saw the New Jersey strike there last, 3 days in total. Mm-hmm. What can we learn from that? And there may be some curiosity among commuters. Could the federal government step in here? Could the federal government do anything to keep this from happening, or keep this from happening, I gather, on Monday?
They didn't. Congress and the federal government didn't step in with New Jersey Transit. So far we haven't seen that yet here. But again, if this strike is prolonged, I would imagine at the federal level there is going to be a lot of incentive to help the MTA, Long Island Railroad, and the unions really come together and really get to that point where they can reach agreement on a wage increase for this year.
Why does commuter rail and public transport struggle to gain traction and funding in this country in ways that it just doesn't other places? I mean, I feel like we were sort of maybe doing a little bit better, and then I know COVID really took a real big hit during COVID, both in ridership and confidence, people not wanting to just share that space with people. Mm-hmm. Has it gotten any better, or why is it struggling so much in so many major U.S. cities that really could use the infrastructure and the help?
They definitely could. We are very much a car culture, and I grew up in the Midwest, and it's not. For most Americans, it just isn't common to get on a train, a commuter train or subway, to go to work. Yeah. And so it's a different mindset. If you're used to driving, it's just what you do. It's different here in New York City. It's really part of our culture, and the city depends so much, not only on the subways and the buses, but the commuter rails as well.
Michelle Caskey, thank you very much. I'm going to be tracking all of this here over the next 24 hours. We'll see what happens. Again, looking at a very busy commute on Monday morning, but appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And up next, we're going to go to the Pointed News Quiz with another special contestant.
Oh, no.
I'm ready for this. It always helps when there's another outsider to make me feel less bad about
but
losing.
Ed Ludlow did great, so we are either going to look really bad or really good. I don't know. We'll have to see.
All right, Lisa Mateo readying the questions right now, again, for that game of Pointed on Bloomberg this weekend, on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. Stick with us.
Stay around.
Time for my regular weekly dose of embarrassment here. Weekend's Pointed News Quiz. Lisa Mateo prepared, 3 questions for us, maybe a bonus as well.
Yes.
Easy ones, right?
And we have a special guest.
We have a special guest at the table, one Dave Merritt, Senior Executive Editor for Bloomberg News. You wanted to stick around.
I heard you voluntarily subjected yourself to this.
I hear you're really good at this game, though.
Yeah. Well, oh, really?
Ooh,
That's the word on the street.
Well, the difference is, as we discuss every week, if you play it online, you get multiple choice.
Not available here.
This makes it much less.
No multiple choice for you this time.
All right, we believe in you.
All right, so this is how we play it on
give us a
BTW
recap.
version. Okay, so you have the chips in front of you. You have 30 chips. We have 3 categories. Okay, for each category, you figure out how confident you are. If you like the first category, you can keep, your 10 chips, or maybe you want to double up. It's up to you. But I'm going to give you the 3 categories and then the questions, okay? The categories are, number 1, sports.
Yeah.
Number 2, media.
That's sport for Dave.
And number 3 is inflation. So based on that, how do you want to place your bets?
What was the third category? Inflation.
Inflation.
Okay.
Do you want to go even across the board?
I'm going to go no sports for you. All right. I'm going to go even split.
You're doing no sports.
No
okay.
sports. Okay. I'm doubling up on media.
All right.
Wow.
Man.
Okay.
Yes.
Career
this is bailiwick.
Here we go. Okay. So here is your sports question. Are you ready for it?
Should not have bet on sports, but I'm doing it.
You have this. You have this. Which restaurant will put its name on the Chicago Fire soccer team's stadium located in the company's hometown?
Right.
What is the name of that restaurant?
Again, I've been out of the country for several days.
Their name will be all over the stadium. The Chicago Fire soccer team.
In lights. And on the jersey.
Oh, man. That's a food question, Lisa, not a sports question.
All right.
All right. That's a sports. Okay.
I got nothing.
Let's flip it.
McDonald's.
What do you have? Burger King. Hot dogs. McDonald's is right.
It's McDonald's.
Okay, it is a $750 million field.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like a local Chicago restaurant.
I thought it can't
So
be
you
McDonald's.
are
you witnessing as David?
Luckily I didn't.
I'm sorry. Did you witness as David Gura gleefully took my chips?
Take them away.
You did. But you didn't bet. You didn't bet on sports. See, that was a smart move on your part.
David's.
So you
Maybe I'm better
stay.
at this.
All right.
Fill us in here, though. Sorry. McDonald's.
Lisa, what's our next torture?
This is media, right?
Okay, media. Oh, so you doubled up on this. All right, here we go. The comedian Byron Allen is paying $120 million for a 52% stake in which online media company?
Can we still call it that?
Ooh.
I know this one.
Good question. Ooh, you wrote very fast.
I'm getting murdered today. I have absolutely no idea.
I'm loving this. It's the double Daves here. Yeah,
Maybe overconfident.
Overconfident.
All right, let's see your answers. Flip it.
BuzzFeed.
Oh, I did hot ones.
BuzzFeed is the one. You are correct.
Now we feast.
So Byron, he's going to replace the CEO. Who founded the company in 2006.
So what do I do with these?
Just keep
Okay, so you
get to hoard them.
I'm hoarding those.
And you and I are tied. Christina sadly is in a deep trough and unable to climb out. So
This is like your best day ever, isn't it?
it's a great day.
Oh,
I usually
Sun is shining.
So smiley.
All right, Lisa.
Let's go to inflation. Okay, you ready for
Can I
it?
just ask a quick question? What is the worth of BuzzFeed today? I mean, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
You could argue it's not $120 million.
Yeah, that's true. Anyways.
I don't know.
We can do a listicle.
Definitely.
Not very
That's why I didn't. I mean, I thought about that, but I didn't.
That's why it struck me, that story.
Yes.
I was like, wow, that's
take a quiz.
Well, Alan wants to turn it into this free TV super app, so we'll see.
Oh,
We'll see what
pivot to
happens.
video.
We'll see what happens with it.
Okay.
All right. Inflation.
Inflation,
Okay,
okay.
ready. Which cottage pie ingredient topped $7 a pound for the first time?
Cottage pie?
Cottage pie is actually
Like a cottage ingredient.
it is a traditional British and Irish casserole.
Boo.
I mean, I know how to make one. How much? What did you say?
All right.
$7 a pound. It topped.
Wow.
The ingredient inside of it topped
All right.
$7
The
a
ingredient
pound for
inside
the
of
first
it?
one. Yes. What is that ingredient?
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, I think I got it wrong.
I wrote lard.
I'm similar. I wrote butter.
Butter.
Ground
Ground beef. You are correct.
Here it
Hearing
wins.
about CPI, right? Well,
Yes.
grocery prices, beef, a lot of things.
We call it
Coffee
minced
also
beef
expensive.
Minced beef.
Lisa,
Right.
that was
I even got the American phrase right.
Do you
Yeah.
make it?
I have made.
He
I
has
have. Do I make it?
He's not known for it.
It's not one of my
his go-to.
specialties.
That was a clear suck up to the boss,
Okay.
Lisa. We're going to talk about this later.
Sorry.
bonus?
Here we go.
There is a bonus
There is a bonus.
to
And
redeem
this one's a
ourselves.
tough one. I don't know if anyone's going to
How
get
does
this.
this work?
Okay.
Am I going to be sort of...
Here we go.
No, I think you've won, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it's for more bragging rights yet.
It's very
So just
depressing.
repeat
If
that.
this is another niche
This
British
is
cultural
just-
category.
Yeah. No, well,
Yeah.
no, not even close.
Okay.
Okay, because it is Trump Xi. That is the category.
Trump Xi, okay.
Okay.
The summit that was.
Xi Jinping said the U.S. and China could transcend the trap named for which
Oh, you have to spell it right.
But you have to
man.
spell it correctly.
Oh, no, the spelling. That's
All right. Well,
Yeah.
with
We're all gonna
I know
appreciation
you got it.
to the great Graham
go
Allison,
for it.
Thucydides.
Thucydides.
Oh, what a wonderful moment we should remember this all turning it around.
Thucydides.
Thank you very
Better
much.
you said it than I did.
Thank you so much.
Random knowledge.
that was a pleasure.
And no point.
Dave Merritt. So we've
I don't
Dave
know.
won.
I think Dave won. Congratulations,
Yeah,
Dave.
30.
This
He
is
has
the
all
best
30.
ever,
That's
I guess.
one in a
Great to
row.
see you. All right. You can test your knowledge on all 10 questions, I should say. Take the pointed news quiz at Bloomberg.com/pointed. Thanks
Remember,
to
it's multiple choice
It is
online,
multiple choice.
so it is slightly easier and
And-
less public and embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, maybe minced beef questions are on there. I'm not sure.
All right.
Anyhow,
Thank you for joining us on Bloomberg this weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini.
we'll hope you join us starting tomorrow, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm David Gura, alongside Lisa Mateo. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, Masters in Business is up next. For our TV audience, Wall Street Week with David Weston starts right now.
Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Oh, tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow. We'll be here tomorrow.